Thank you. Okay, Chair, we're now live.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Harriet. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee on the 16th of June. I hope you're all very well. I've got a sea of eager faces in front of me on Zoom. That's fantastic. We'll do introductions, but first I've got some prepared remarks because today's meetings are a little different. So, as I said, I'm Councillor Neil Walsh, I'm the chair. I'd like to point out for clarity that this meeting has been webcast live to enable public access. It has not been held in public meeting in accordance with the Local Government Act 1972. As such, it is a remote consultative meeting of the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee. And I'm going to come to how we're going to take things forward after introductions and not my remarks, folks. The consultative status of today's meeting means that some of the usual formalities will not take place at the start of the meeting. This also means the committee will not be in a position to take any formal decisions, and when necessary, any proposed actions do require some formal ratification, and they'll be referred to the next formal public meeting of the committee for approval. So can I please remind members, I know you all know this, but still, to turn your microphones to mute when they're not speaking. Please, if you could use the raising hand function. If you've got your hand raised and I've not brought you in, please make it clear. I may have missed you, and we'll go through agenda and we'll have a good discussion. So let's do some introductions in turn, starting with Councillor Anderson.
Councillor Barry Anderson, Adelaide Wharfdale Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Neil Buckley, Old Woodley Ward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Carlill.
Morning all, Councillor Peter Carlill, Carley and Farsley Ward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dobson.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Mark Dobson, Garforth and Swillington Ward. And with your indulgence, Chair,
yep.
I have a funeral to attend at 12 o'clock, so I'll be leaving at about 11:15. Thank you.
That's not a problem at all. I'm very sorry I'm to experience that. My commiserations, or condolences rather. Councillor Flint. Oh, sorry, I do apologise. Councillor Finnegan first.
I'm Robert. Morning, I'm Robert Finnegan. I'm a councillor for the Morley North Ward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Flint.
Hi, I'm Councillor Emma Flint, new councillor for Wheatwood.
Thank you very much. Councillor Forsyth.
Good morning, Councillor Anne Forsyth, Farnley and Wortley Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Hartbrook.
Good morning, Councillor Hartbrook, the new councillor for Rothwell Ward.
Wonderful, thank you. Councillor Hayden.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Helen Hayden, Temple Newton Ward and Exec Member for Infrastructure and Climate.
Thank you. And Councillor Illingworth has not yet joined us, I don't think. So let's move on to Councillor Shazad.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Mohammed Shazad from the Moortown and Meanwood Ward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Robinson.
Morning, everybody. Councillor Matthew Robinson from the Harewood Ward, substituting today.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ray.
Councillor Paul Ray from Hunslet and Riverside Ward.
Thank you. And let's have officers present introduce themselves. So, Polly.
Hi, good morning. Polly Kirk, Chief Officer for Sustainable Energy and Air Quality.
Thank you very much. And Harriet.
Good morning, Harriet Spate, Governance Officer.
Lovely, thank you so much. So sharp-eyed members will have picked up, we have some new members joining SEAC. So Councillor Dobson, Councillor Finnegan, Councillor Flint, Councillor Hartbrook and Councillor Hayden are all new members of SEAC, so you're very welcome. This is a cross-party committee, as you'll understand. Try to run things on a collegiate, reasonably non-partisan basis. So we've got an awfully important agenda. And as I've said before on a few occasions, one of the few saving graces of UK politics is that climate emergency is not in doubt. We understand the seriousness of the gravity of the issues we face. And that's a most welcome feature of UK politics, as I've said. We have an awful lot to do this municipal year. It's going to be exciting, interesting, and it should scare you somewhat. And the latter is a good thing. It gives us an energy and purpose, doesn't it? So, in terms of how we organise ourselves, over our recent unpleasantness and current pleasantness for the last 15 months, we've had some disruption, but we've been meeting remotely. Now, the government's legislation means that if we meet remotely as a constituted committee of council in line with the executive board, plans panels, development plan panel, we can only take decisions if we meet in person. And obviously we've been meeting remotely. What I was wanting to run past the committee colleagues is that what I propose is that we move full SEACs like this to Civic to meet in person, but we continue the working groups remotely. For new members, we have a number of working groups that meet regularly. They're open to all members of council, as I'm sure you'll have heard me say in other forums. But they are an informal and non-public meeting there where we look at pick apart particular issues in detail, from planning, energy, biodiversity, that kind of thing. Now, those I propose we continue to meet remotely. But what I was wanting to gauge members' views on, would you be comfortable? Now, I would as chair, to put my cards on the table, so to speak. Would you be comfortable in moving SEAC back to meeting in Civic? Councillor Buckley, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think you know my views on this because I wrote to you and I haven't had a reply. But my feeling on this is that obviously at the moment, we're not able to have a proper back to normal meeting because of the government regulations. But we're now told that these are going to come off in July. And whether it's July or the 1st of August or goodness knows when, it will be reasonably soon. My strong feeling is that there should be no continuation with remote meetings because we have so many disadvantages. It seems to me that the people who benefit from remote meetings are people who can dial in from large houses out in the countryside and not have to bother coming into Leeds. They don't have to see the city at all. Some councillors have spare rooms and others don't, but it just seems to me that this kind of demi-world of pretend meetings should not go on in any shape or form because it actually detracts from the democratic process. It makes it less legitimate in my view. And there you are, Chair, that's my opinion.
Well, thank you. Colourfully put. Councillor Carlill.
Thanks, Chair. I'll put a slightly contrasting view, I'm afraid. I completely appreciate the difficulties some members have with getting onto these meetings, although I do find it a bit of a sorry state that suddenly we don't have the choice as a committee necessarily at the moment whether we can make decisions remotely. As you'll know, many of us have been on plans panel meetings remotely over the time that have had many more people watch them than would have were we sat in a room in the Civic Hall. And I feel it a bit strange me having to make a 7-mile journey into the city centre in order to be able to make decisions when I can do that perfectly well from within my ward. So I think I completely appreciate though that it does rely on members having that space in which they can join these meetings. However, I think we'd look at any guidance clearly, and I feel that the guidance and the other difficulty about meeting in person in the Civic Hall is obviously the restrictions on the numbers of people in a room, etc. And actually, I find on balance myself, I find that going into those meetings, being that distance, being in the council chamber, makes it incredibly hard to see the presentations, to have a debate anyway. And actually, I find it easier when everyone's on screen in front of me. So I think every opportunity should be taken to see how we do these remotely and to ensure that going forward, the council has the regulations it needs in national policy to allow it to do so if it so wishes.
Thanks for that, Peter. I would point out that the meeting, if we went back into Civic, the meetings would be hybrid meetings where people would be joining us remotely to make contributions. We would be taking advantage of the fact that there are some people we'd love to speak to, and we'll, some of the items coming up in the forward plan have people who will probably wouldn't be able to make it up to see us, but can speak to us remotely. So they would continue to be on a hybrid basis. So thanks for that. So Councillor Dobson next.
Thanks, Chair. I always appreciate the views of Councillor Buckley, but on this occasion, I do have very mixed feelings about this for several reasons. Firstly, and I think just for clarity, and I know you'll clarify at the end of what I've got to say, Chair. If decisions have to be made in a public meeting, in a natural forum where we see the whites of each other's eyes, well, that's fair enough. And I notice you've said about hybrid meetings. So one question is maybe if you were attending a meeting electronically at an actual meeting that had been convened in the Civic, could you take part in that decision process? But on meetings where we're not having a decision on any matter, well, you know, with a climate emergency board, and I would think perhaps it might be something for this board to consider that, you know, we could perhaps be an exemplar of good practice around this, and where we can work remotely, we should. So maybe that hybrid approach for decision-making meetings would be appropriate, but as and when we can, not. Now, the other reason I'd tend to disagree with Neil is because personally, as a councillor that also works full-time, I've found it much better from a personal perspective, and it's not about me, to actually get to and engage in meetings. And I do think that's been a particular weeping sore at the council for many years, that discrepancy. So I'm very much for a mixed picture, but when we do need to make a decision and we do need to meet, absolutely fine. But in terms of this particular board, I do think where we could meet remotely, we should.
Okay, thanks very much. Councillor Forsyth.
Right, I'm agreeing with both what Councillor Carlhill said. And I'm just going to add one other thing, and that is basically that the COVID pandemic has happened within the climate emergency time, where we're sort of, but the changes, I think, in working practices about much more working from home has just been brought forward by the pandemic. And it is one way that we can respond to the climate emergency anyway. And we also save time, traveling time, etc. So as well as modelling, we need to model that way in our climate emergency advisory committee meetings in particular. So I agree with what the last two councillors have said. Okay, thanks.
Okie dokie, thank you. Councillor Ray.
So, unsurprisingly, I'm going to agree with all the previous statements other than Councillor Buckley. I think there are a couple of points to this. One is the exemplar point that this is meant to be a climate change committee, and the idea that we're all going to be sitting, or majority of sitting in cars going to the Civic, probably stuck in traffic, is probably not the best example to put forward. The world of work has changed. We're expecting our staff at the council to work in different ways, and I think we forget that actually staff have to come in to meetings, and actually that means when we have a reduced workforce, a higher workload, we're asking staff to take time coming into the office unnecessarily when they could be doing other tasks and other duties. I think there's an efficiency gain. You know, again, councillors who might drive might not want to be stuck in traffic for 45 minutes getting to the centre of Leeds. And that's not taken account of until hopefully we sort the bus service out. Those councillors who don't drive, who may not want to be stuck on public transport, trying to get into a meeting and back and forth. And I very much agree actually with Councillor Dobson's point. You know, for those councillors who work, have childcare commitments, etc., this gives greater flexibility. We should be a more modern workforce. And I just think actually the world has changed now. So I think absolutely we need to follow the regulations. If we have to be in the Civic where we're actually making a statutory decision and it has to be down on paper, that's fine. But where we have the flexibility to be a modern forward-thinking council, reduce our carbon footprint, reduce the burden on our staff, reduce the burden on our transport network, increase our efficiency when we're always trying to make sure we're getting value for public money and we are ultimately paid for by the public, then why would we want to be waiting 45 minutes, an hour and a half going back and forth when I can sit there and do casework for my constituents?
Fair enough, forcefully put. Councillor Hayden.
I won't take up much time because actually I was just going to expand upon the efficiency of kind of being able to join many more meetings much more easily, and for the public to do so as well. Councillor Carlow referred to many more people watching plans panels meetings, for example. In fact, I think it makes it more democratic, because how many of the general public can get in on, at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday morning? People are working, but they can watch this back on YouTube, and they can, be part of that democratic process. So I think it makes it much, much more democratic. I just want to expand, and this is why I retain my hand up, but Councillor Ray has mentioned it. Those of us with caring responsibilities, the last year has been extremely tough, as you, Chair, know. Homeschooling aside, but the fact that I can walk my children to school, because I don't have to get into civic for a certain time, so I can walk my children to school, walk home, and open my laptop and be ready to start work. So it's not just the journeys into, it's those school run journeys or caring responsibility journeys. And also, if my child is ill for whatever reason, I can make this meeting. I can, and still fulfill that. Whereas I'm in the civic hall, I have memories of dreading the school phoning and me having to run out. So yeah, there are a lot of advantages to these hybrid. I obviously completely understand the legislation, and having been in an actual meeting, you're kind of right. You can't have a debate when you're it must be 12 foot away from somebody. It's extremely difficult. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Yeah, the semaphore system for room 6 and 7 is a little bit designed. I think I can see where people are thinking. Councillor Finnegan and then Councillor Robinson.
Most of it's been said. I hate dragging into the civic. Stick with remote.
See, that's what I like about you, Councillor Finnegan. To the point, concise. Councillor Robinson.
Thanks, Chair. I make some comments as a sub, so they may well be completely,
sure. No problem.
Completely ignored, but there you go. It's I was interested to hear Councillor Hayden say you can't debate with somebody when they're 12 feet away, but presumably 12 miles away will be okay when you're dialing in remotely. So, but I have some sympathy with those who are suggesting a hybrid format. I do understand where we're coming from. I do understand the difficulties of those who work. As somebody who works myself, and you're trying to juggle responsibilities for 10 years, I've been talking about not having to come into council for briefings. But we need to be clear, the formal meetings we don't have a choice in. We will have to meet in person. It's these more informal meetings. The challenge I would pose to the committee is that nowhere on your work programme does it talk about what the impact of this working from home would have on the city and the city's economy, what it would have on jobs and businesses through climate change. The Centre for Cities is saying within the next 2 years, people will return to 5-day working practices back in the city centre. If you consider that we have 8,000 staff that would be working from home, if they're back in the council, if they're back in Leeds 3 days a week, 52 weeks a year, spending £3 a day, that on rough maths, that's about 2.5 million that's not going back into the Leeds economy. And that's just the council and council employees. So while I understand the need to push to a hybrid format, it does have consequences and an impact on what that means for the city, the economy, and for jobs as well. So I would suggest that if you are taking this format forward, it's worth considering what this will have as an economic impact on the city.
Okay. Had a couple of messages from a couple of sources that I think hybrid meetings would be difficult under current legislation. But that hybrid basis wouldn't be decision makers. It would just be literally people wanting to speak to the committee. So I think, though, from what everyone said, I think we're the general view, and we are a collegiate bunch after all, is that we keep doing what we're doing. Councillor Buckie, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. If you don't mind me just coming back on this, because I think it's such an important an important, well, it's a fundamental, to me, it's a fundamental issue. And if I can just, I've written down 4 quick things, actually. What council officers do, how they arrange their time, is of no concern to me at all. If they never want to come into the civic except to see councillors in particular, meetings that they have between themselves is entirely a matter for them and their organisation. The carbon emissions point is an interesting one because I took the time to get a little briefing on this, and I'm not going to read it all out because it's couched in very technical language, but there is a big debate as to whether carbon emissions are higher by thousands and millions of computers whirring away in all sorts of ways, as opposed to, for instance, councillors catching the bus into town. Because Councillor Ray mentioned cars. Yeah, we've all got cars. Get the bus, you know, or get the train. We're supposed to be a climate committee. And what just slightly surprises me about this is that officers are officers. They write reports, they draw up agendas, they speak to the bosses, they do the job, they go home, or they are at home. We're politicians. Surely we have to meet and persuade and talk and touch people and shake hands and do all the things that politicians do in normal life. One final point.
Good.
Somebody mentioned ongoing restrictions. There won't be any. When the restrictions come off, they come off. And so any restrictions then put on our meetings will be by Leeds City Council, not by the government.
Right, okay. Certainly opened a hornet's nest with this one, didn't I? Okay, how about, folks, right? Because we have got a lot to get through today, and we try to get through it in 2 hours. We start about 10 past, so it's already 10:27. I know there are people indicating they want to speak, but I think the strong steer from members here is that we keep on doing what we're doing for now. Let's keep an eye on things, see how they evolve. There are probably 1 or 2 times of the year we would absolutely have to be together in civic. For example, I think the report to executive board would need agreeing, that kind of thing. So if myself as chair, we'll keep an eye on how this is evolving and then report back, but we'll keep doing what we're doing for now. Is that okay? Yeah? Seen lots of nods. Councillor Finnegan, you still got your hand up. Is there anything particular to this?
Apologies, Chair. I'll put it down.
Oh, no worries. That's fantastic. Right, folks. On that note, let's make progress. So, if I return to my script. Okay, so Harriet, after that, let's move to our regular items. So, any apologies?
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Garthwaite and Councillor Wadsworth have submitted their apologies, and Councillor Robinson is here subbing for Councillor Wadsworth.
Thank you very much. Item number 2, any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interest, members? Should imagine there is. Looking at, nope. Excellent. Okay. So item 3, the minutes from our meeting of 10th of March 2021. So that's page 5 to 8. I'm not gonna of your book. I'm not going to go through every line of the meetings, but is there any matters arising from the minutes that members want to raise? I appreciate we've got new members, but who weren't at this meeting. But if there's no matters arising, is somebody prepared to move the minutes as a true record?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Okay.
Sorry. They're just to note at this stage they will need ratifying at a future meeting.
They will. Yes.
Thank you.
I believe Harriet will be ratifying them en masse at some point in the coming months in an in-person meeting. Okay. So for new members, so the 4th item you'll see on your papers is open forum. So when we meet in person, people come and speak to us as a committee. But we do this remotely. So there are 2 videos for this time. And what then we do, we then reply as a committee at a later date to what's been raised. It's a really excellent way of engaging with the public and for people to bring things to our attention. So we've got our future leads and the East of Otley Action Group. So Chad, can you play the videos?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I'll just present them now. One moment.
Lovely.
Hi there, my name is Paul Chatterton. As many of you might know, I'm Professor of Urban Futures at the University of Leeds, but I'm also from the civic group Our Future Leeds, one of the groups that helped build the momentum for declaring the climate emergency in Leeds a few years ago. Now, this is a short video intervention that you're showing at SEAC, so thank you very much for showing it and giving time for it. There's really specifically one key message that this video is based around, and we want to know a little bit more and help you and support you with your planning process around climate emergency action planning. So I just want to really just run through some of the challenges for that context and really ask you about the planning process going forward and some of the challenges in the city and how they fit into that planning process. So over the next 3 or 4 minutes, I just want to outline a number of things. The first one is the challenge. I just want to recap on the challenge, if that's okay, just to make sure we're on the same page with the challenge. I'm just going to run through some of the basics again, just so we can have a conversation about this, because I think it's so important. So of course, it starts with this issue around the parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. We're already over 410 parts per million of carbon, so a lot of accumulation of carbon in the atmosphere. We need to get down to 350 parts per million. So that is the task. Right, we're putting carbon emissions in the atmosphere at an increasing rate. The reason that's important is obviously because it's driving global temperature increase. We're already at 1.1 degrees. Now, the global scientific community says we need to hold it at 1.5, no more than 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. But we're on track for a 2, 3 or 4 degree hotter world. And we know the basket of consequences that means. It means a whole bunch of things and negative impacts. We don't want to get to that place. Beyond 1.5 degrees of global warming, it's a less safe planet. So we need to do our bit in Leeds to make sure we don't exceed that. Now, the whole way to not exceed that is to not exceed the carbon budget that the global scientific community have established that we cannot exceed. So look, for the whole planet, it's 420 gigatons, right? I don't have to worry about that big figure. In the UK, it's 3.7 gigatons, right? But more interestingly for Leeds here, well, we calculated back in 2009, the Climate Commission did this, just on a population percentage, it's 44 million tonnes. So that's the key issue, 44 million tonnes, right, of carbon is our carbon budget as a city. That's back in 2019, right, by the way. So at the rate of use, which is 4 million tonnes. Remember, so we emit 4 million tonnes of carbon as a city, mainly from transport, housing, and other stuff in the city. Okay, you might have seen the figure of 3 million tonnes, but that actually excludes pass-through emissions from motorways, which I would include, by the way. So some government statistics do include it. So look, at the rate of 4 million tonnes a year, right? Going back to that 44 million tonnes, what you'll realise is that we're already down to 36 million tonnes as a budget. Yeah. So when will we, at the rate of use, if that rate of use doesn't shift dramatically in 9 years, right, 36 million tonnes, we will have spent our total budget in 9 years and we'll fall off a cliff edge, because in 9 years' time, we will have to be basically at zero. So this is the zero emissions as a city. So how do we do that sustainably? Look, so I've done this kind of thing before, but I just wanted to show you graphically because PowerPoints are really dull and this is a much more interesting way to do it. Look, that's our budget spread out, right? This is the curve we're on now, the dotted line. We have to get on this other curve. So the point is, that's our budget. That's the bit we can still use. This is the bit we can't use, right? This is really important. This is the bit that you have to plan around, right? That we cannot use. This is the bit we have to delete equitably from the city's activities, right? So this is a key thing for us. What we're aware of at Our Future Leeds is that we appreciate that the climate team reports annually to you, right, in terms of what they're doing. But the city lacks a clear climate plan, and that is quite worrying given the emergency status. So our call to you is that you need a climate emergency plan urgently. Now, here's the process. You've got the evidence because of the excellent Climate Commission's roadmap, right? You've got the roadmap. You know what the evidence is. You need to turn that into a local authority owned plan with targets that you own and create as a city. So we don't have that as a city. You have to allocate a budget to make sure that plan is met, And then you need to create a scrutiny process and a reporting process to make sure that that plan and that budget is spent accurately to get us to safety, to net zero by the 2030s. So we as citizens need to see that you having a plan to get us to a safe place by the 2030s. And cities across Britain are doing this excellently. For example, some great templates out there you can look at and talk to your colleagues in other cities. Bristol have got this really great one city climate strategy, which documents exactly how the city is going to get to zero, right? In great detail, with the targets, taking stuff like the Climate Commission's already done and putting that into a planning process, yeah? Exeter's done the same, net zero, Exeter plan, really great stuff there, right? Equally, Wokingham, who I've been supporting, got this really great climate action plan. You can download all these from the internet, they're really great, or I can send you them, yeah? And interestingly, Wokingham have got this overview and scrutiny committee, right, which scrutinises the plans and to make sure they're on target. So maybe your advisory committee status needs to change to become more of a scrutiny status. Now, we're very aware there's lots going on in the city. Now, you've got a big task ahead of you, really to keep us all safe and to get us on track. And there's lots of activity areas, right, happening in the city, especially around housing and especially around transport. So we would suggest that every time there's a planning application for a road or a housing scheme, you need to be totally on top of it in terms of how much of that city budget it eats into, right? So every time there's a big housing development or a big road development, you need to be aware of how much of this 44 million tonnes that eats into. So the east of Otley Ring Road, does any of you know how much of our carbon budget, precious carbon budget, that takes over its whole life cycle? If you don't, you need to find out. The East Leeds Orbital Ring Road, the same. Any big volume built housing development, the same. You need to be on top of it and tell us how much and report how much that eats into our carbon budget. If it's bigger than you would anticipate in a fair shares way, then that development can't go ahead. Everything from now on has to be net zero. Otherwise, we will not meet our targets and Leeds will not contribute to a safe future for this planet. I can't say this in much stronger, urgent terms. We're very keen at Our Future Leeds to support you. You're doing fantastic work. We know you've got the commitment and insight. So let's work together. Bring us into this process so we can create a proper city plan and you can own that and report on that and scrutinise that. But every single decision counts from now on. You need to be on top of those decisions. So rather than these vague statements in executive reports around we've considered the climate emergency, we need to know hard figures and hard targets about how it's affecting our budget and our performance. Okay, so thank you very much. You probably got my email by Neil and others. It's p.chatterton@leeds.ac.uk. Future Leeds is around to support you. So good luck and look forward to more.
My name is Jane Trewella and I'm submitting this video on behalf of the East of Otley Action Group. I'm a resident of Otley and we're submitting this video very late. I hope you'll accept it. We have 3,700 pages of a planning application for 700 plus houses to review in the space of, I think, somewhat less than 2 months. So we're all quite busy at the moment. In order to submit a video, which I do hope you'll accept and use at your open forum, we received a really heartfelt response to the application shortly after it came out from a local resident who also happens to know a lot about the climate emergency and carbon emissions and to care passionately about it. So I'm going to read you a few excerpts from your draft consultation document for the local plan update, which you'll very much be familiar with, I'm sure. And I'm also going to then read you some excerpts from what he sent to us. So this is from, to start with, extracts from the draft consultation document for the LPU. Leeds City Council declared a climate emergency in March 2019 with an ambition to work towards carbon neutrality by 2030. A rapid period of transition is necessary, along with big changes. The IPCC warned that the window of opportunity to limit average global temperature increases under 1.5 centigrade will vanish in the next decade. The committee has found that the government's policies and plans are not enough to meet carbon budgets and that the policy gap has widened. If we continue business as usual, Yorkshire and Humber's carbon budget, estimated at around 250 megatons, will have been used up by 2025. A report by Carbon Roadmap demonstrates that it is technically and to a large extent economically possible for Leeds to become carbon neutral by 2050 and potentially by 2030. No one can afford to not play their part or to leave it to someone else to make the efforts. And now what follows are the excerpts from our local residents' very passionate observations about the planning application for the fields on the east of Otley. To anyone with a scrap of environmental sympathy, it is now entirely obvious that mankind's defeat in the war it has chosen to wage against nature will be a devastatingly bruising, humiliating and miserable affair, and that when the time comes for the account to be settled, those who in their greed, arrogance and stupidity perpetrated the worst crimes will be gone, and the cost will be borne by our children and theirs. The destruction of nature caused by this development, so monstrous in its scope and scale that it cannot nearly be mitigated within the site, is in no way justified by the end result. The wasteful houses to be built, as technically unimaginative as they are aesthetically meaningless, are so poorly specified and densely packed as to eliminate any possibility of a harmonious relationship between their occupants and whatever nature may remain upon completion of this ill-conceived development. For this area, to all intents and purposes, a bog, is as perfect for an abundance of natural life as it is unsuitable for typical English houses. To the considerable environmental cost of taming the site must be added the cost in terms of materials, energy and carbon of constructing these entirely conventional houses, whose anachronistic specification will guarantee that upon completion they are immediately in need of costly and disruptive retrofitting, that their occupants' legitimate aspiration to live responsibly, comfortably and economically will be frustrated, and that the duty of care that our generation has to those too young to comprehend such matters will be betrayed. So that's just an excerpt. There is a lot more detail around the reasons why the current proposed build of the houses is unsuitable and how costly retrofitting them would be. I really hope you'll consider this submission for your open forum. Many people in Otley feel really strongly about this development. It will have a big impact on us in terms of the building, so for the next few years, and the carbon emissions from the building, but also the carbon emissions from the site itself. Thank you for listening.
You would have thought, wouldn't you, after 15 months of this, I would have realised, you know, seriously. Well, that took the edge off the seriousness of what I was saying. No, those are two really good video contributions. I think for new members, that first one was a really useful primer, actually, in some of the challenges we face. What I propose to do, we don't usually discuss the responses to Open Forum now at length, but clearly, so much going on in the city. I think if we bring the carbon plan as an item, we'll look at that in the future work programme as an item sooner rather than later. Because I think what we're doing in the city, if you brought it all together, collated it and stuck a front cover on it, it would look like a Leeds carbon plan in the similar vein to what Bristol's done. But there are obviously some additional decision-making elements to some of the issues that Mr. Chatterton raised, Paul raised. So that needs bringing together. So what I suggest we do is bring that as an ASAP future item. How about that? Councillor Robertson, you've got your hand raised.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, if Professor Chatterton fails at being a professor, a career in Blue Peter beckons. I think Tracy Island being constructed for the next, a carbon neutral Tracy Island for the next meeting. Presumably on submitting his video, there is no plan and nothing for him and his colleagues to be able to scrutinise for this committee's work and for the council's work. So that's his implication. He's saying there isn't something that we can look at.
Well, the council's carbon programme, climate emergency programme is vast and expanding. what it's not is perhaps brought into one document with a front cover on, Matt. I think that's the basic, the issue that they have. So we can bring that as an item. I think that's probably the best way forward.
I'm just trying to share it. Yeah, if he's talking about the planning process, this committee's been going on for some time. I wonder if it's worth having documents that can keep something that's digital that can keep being updated and added to, as opposed, so even something that is initially there for people to scrutinise, and keep extending it, and it becomes a 2.0 or 3.0 version. Because the suggestion from Professor Chatterton is that if there is nothing to scrutinise, you don't know what success is, and I would agree with him on that.
Yeah, I don't disagree per se, but I don't think we should be. But I don't think we should be thinking that there isn't an awful lot, and as members have been on this panel a while will know, there are an awful lot of extensive works and programs going on in the city. Like I said, but perhaps we haven't done the work of collating it together and, like I said, sticking a front cover on it and calling it the Leeds Carbon Plan. And perhaps we need to do that. And that's something we can take forward. And again, metrics are always good. We have quite a lot of metrics that we measure ourselves against, which we can speak to as a future item, because I don't want to get derailed onto this. Because, for example, Polly could speak at length about all the things we do and how we measure our progress. But perhaps we need to bring that as a future item so we can put a more of a structure on it. I think that's probably a good way forward. Councillor Forsyth and Councillor Anderson, is it points about that you want to raise? Brief points.
Brief points. After those very serious reminders of exactly what position we are in Leeds and as decision makers, when the climate emergency motion was passed, sadly, an amendment wasn't passed with it, which required us to have an action plan. If we're going to do this, we need to have an action plan. So my question really is, can we get that? Can we start that, please, at the next meeting? This is an emergency. It's not enough to say, well, unless we've got our targets, unless we have got a plan to which we are working, we're not going to get to 2030 zero carbon. Thank you.
Oh, it is an emergency, and the work of the last 2 years of this committee would attest to that. But like I said, we can bring this forward so we can collate it together and put some metrics on it. Councillor Anderson.
Two things. One, the scrutiny board that I chair is ready and waiting and will carry out any scrutiny that the administration want. I've met both with you, Chair, and the exec member and senior officers to look at what we can do. So we are ready and willing to meet that part of Mr. Chatterton's request. The one part you won't like is that planning, our planning department are and I understroke that 3 or 4 times, the major problem to us meeting our targets, because they do not get climate change. They look for excuses every time to allow developments to go forward that do not comply with climate change. And unless we answer and do something about that now, if we wait until the review of all the policies have done, there's going to be at least another year's worth of development in this city and another year's worth of development that is not in compliance with the climate agenda. And unless we grasp that nettle quickly, we are in a real mess. And the Otley development is a perfect example of that. There's a number of other ones that we've got to get right. I know it's controversial, but the airport planning application, that is going to have an effect on the area as well. And we need to have a council policy on what's happening one way or the other. But planning, I would argue, is the major problem we've got. Transport are trying. Housing are trying to retrofit, because some of us have benefited from some conversations on that recently. Planning, in my view, are not.
Okay, well, I would disagree entirely with that. It's that same planning service that your state doesn't get climate that's currently undertaking probably the most comprehensive and leading edge review of planning in the frame of climate emergency, in the lens of climate emergency in the country. They do have that everything's going out to consultation at present. They do have, though, Barry, as you're very, very well aware, a lot of statutory instruments and hoops to jump through that are not fit for purpose, that don't fit the times we're in, the climate emergency we're in, because they're conceived in a different era to cover a whole range of other subjects, and that's a handicap that we have as a country as a whole. But that process is well underway and is incredibly ambitious, and will contribute hugely over the next 10 years to get us to net zero. But I mean, that is a work in progress, but that's the world we're in. Councillor Dobson, really briefly.
Chair, can I come back in just quickly on that?
Briefly.
That is not the case. If an application is not policy compliant, it should not be getting approved, period. Doesn't matter which policy it's not compliant on. If an application is not policy compliant, we should be recommending refusal of it. And if it's not complying with our current policies, EN1 and EN2 for a start, then it should not be getting brought forward for approval.
Well, look, as someone who sits on city plans, I haven't seen an application come forward and been passed that isn't compliant with the EN1 and EN2 in the past 2 years. But, you know, so anyway, Councillor Dobson, really briefly, and then I
will be brief, Chair, but this does need saying, actually, thank you for your indulgence. I'd have more sympathy for the council's position and the development department's position some of the applications that are coming forward are at absolute variance to the climate change agenda. The worst example I can possibly bring to mind off the top of my head is the proposed short-term car park on George Street in an already congested area around the Playhouse area. And that is an application brought forward by Leeds City Council. I've been trying for years now to get that quashed. So I think the point is inescapable that the council should actually on this agenda be leading by example. I admire your valiant defence of the council and the planning process, Neil, but there are clear examples out there where the council could and should be leading by example. But the one thing I would say to our first colleague from the academic perspective, I've approached senior academics at Leeds City Council to get them on board around this particular planning application, and the silence has been deafening. And I do think that as well as presenting scientific evidence, I'd like to see a little bit more muscle from the academic community in terms of how they apply pressure to the council, not like we're all part of some extended club that supports one another. Because the science is there, but like anything, it needs to be, how can I put this? It needs to be put forward in a way that actually takes on some of the more controversial planning applications like the one I've highlighted.
Because I think, look, points noted. I mean, this is something we could move to the development plan panel arena to discuss there, because the local plan review with the climate emergency focus is progressing at the fastest speed that the statutory instruments that we're stuck with will allow. And I want to move to phone. Councillor Illingworth, you've got your hand up. Is it really brief?
No, it's quite extended, Chair. I've been trying to get into the meeting for the last half hour, so I've no idea which item you've got up to. I haven't heard any of the previous conversation.
We're in open forum, John. We've just had 2 contributions from open forum,
okay.
which I'm sure Harriet will be able to forward you to them. But I really want to move things on to the agenda item.
Indeed, okay, I'm happy with that, because I have a lot of sympathy with what's just been said, but I think we need to do it to the right part of the agenda.
We absolutely do. So, on that note, colleagues, let's move to, just on the East of Otley thing. Yes, it's a big, significant application. It is a live planning application. It's better discussed in a planned environment. We don't as yet have a statutory role in terms of live planning applications. But I mean, it does fall under the plans process at the moment, and it is something that it is very serious in terms of getting that application to be climate proof, if you like. And I think that's work in progress. I think I want to leave that as a live plan application, but I think the points were well made by the video. That's something that ward members could take up with the chair of the relevant plans panel, and myself in my role as DP chair as well, and this role as well. by all means. Right, folks, let's move on. Working groups update, item 5. Polly.
Okay, so the working groups have been slightly quieter, I think, over the last month or so during leading up to the election period. Pre-elections with the food and biodiversity, we met with Professor Caroline Orfila, who explained to us how the food system in Leeds currently works, and the percentage of self-sustainability we have as a city in terms of the calorie consumption of the city and the calorie production. And looked at some of the challenges we have in terms of kind of diversity of crops, the way the agricultural systems developed over time. So the next sort of challenge to that group is to pull together a low carbon action plan and actually put that into some kind of deliverable actions, and that will link across to things like planning. In terms of the planning and housing working group, we met last week and had a really productive session looking very specifically at a standard called PAS 2035, which is a retrofit standard which is causing a lot of challenges at the moment for the council in terms of some of the delivery. The policy intent is about improving retrofit standard, which as a council we're clearly supportive of. However, some of the practical deliverables behind that standard drive some funny behaviours, in the sense that sometimes it's better to just put one retrofit measure on a house, which can never be the ideal solution. It's increasing costs by about probably £4,000 for EWI, which is making it unaffordable. It doesn't fit with the government grant levels. So we developed a kind of lobbying position, key asks, and we're now working that through into how we take that forward and working across partners across the country. So that's a fairly fundamental part in terms of housing retrofit and how we actually make that deliverable. The transport working group hasn't met, and when we get to the forward plan, we're just going to discuss that a little bit and about that working group structure and what we do going forward. So if I can leave it there for now, Chair.
Thanks very much. Anyone got any points to raise on that before we move on to the forward plan? Okay, I see no takers. Right, in that case, item 6 is the forward plan for this municipal year. So that's on pages 9 to 6 of your document bundle. Obviously, we've had some preliminary discussions about the areas of work and the areas of inquiry. There's an awful lot of ground we need to cover this year. But having in our opening discussions, we were wanting to bring up particularly the issue of funding. I think members have been on this committee a while, but this is more for the benefit of new members, will realise the things we know now, as opposed to 2 or 3 years ago, about what we need to do is incredible. For example, take retrofit of housing. We now know so much more. Our issue is, how do we fund things and how do we deliver things? And I think that's a huge issue for all local authorities. We're into year 11 of local government austerity, and we need to find the ways of doing things. So we're looking at all the ways to fund, and that was a sort of initial main item. But Polly, do you want to pick this up and take members through, and then we'll open it up for a discussion about ordering and other items that need to come in if people want them to. Just before you do, Polly, I mean, obviously the contribution we had from Paul Chatterton, I think that needs to come a response to that and a discussion of that and how to collate what we're doing together and put some metrics on it. I think that needs to come fairly soon in the forward item as well. But anyway, Polly, over to you.
Okay, so if we start with the working groups, just to follow on with what I've said, so the proposal for next year is that we still have 3 working groups, and 2 of them stay the same, so the food and biodiversity and the planning, buildings and energy. I can't remember quite the exact title, but you'll know the one I'm referring to. And then the 3rd group has been focused on transport. And I think over the last year there's been some sort of valuable discussion, but actually there's a lot that happens around transport. There's a lot of cross-party member working groups. So trying to define a purpose specifically for that group, I think we found more challenging. But we also recognise that it does contribute to 30% of emissions, so we don't want to underplay it. So one of the things that we considered is whether we look at behaviour change as a working group, and that will obviously include transport as a sort of subset of that, But actually, a lot of what we need to achieve in terms of communication and engagement, which is what the latter part of this session will focus on, is actually getting kind of everyone to understand the sort of challenges we're facing and the kind of impact and actions that they can personally take. So we thought a focus on kind of behaviour change and comms and engagement on a more regular basis through a working group would be really beneficial to try and improve our engagement across the city. So that's kind of one recommendation. I think the other thing is we have got a lot of new members here today, and although the working groups have always been open to all members, and that offer has been sent out multiple times, it's probably worth just flagging to new members the existence of those 3 working groups, and if they want to participate in any of them, if they can maybe just drop me an email afterwards and we'll get them added into those sessions. So that's the working group part. In terms of the forward plan, in terms of the action plan that's been referred to, I suppose, you know, if we start to think about housing as one element of that action plan, which is about 1/3 of our emissions, and then we start to break that down further, which is what we have done in the previous exec board reports, you start to look at the bits that we can directly impact in terms of existing housing. And obviously with our own council housing, we have quite a robust plan. We've got an investment commitment. We have the programmes that are going ahead, so there's work happening. The areas where we struggle more, where we don't have the control, is really around that kind of able to pay owner-occupied market. And so what we can do to enable that is around the comms and engagement, which we'll hear about more in terms of helping people to understand. But the other thing is around funding, which is why that was leading into the first item we've proposed. And in my view, that is the biggest challenge that we face at the moment in terms of the climate emergency, is actually how do you fund some of this work? And what we would like to do at that July group is to get some different organisations to come and talk about their ideas. So we'd like to be able to include people like the UK GBC, the UK Green Finance Institute, Bankers Without Boundaries, and other organisations that are really focusing on this. And I don't know what the answer is to that question, but what I'd really like to do is be able to give members the opportunity to hear from a number of different organisations who are having this same debate and see how as a council we come up with an action plan to develop that going forward. And so for me, that is a fundamental building block. So us being able to deliver and develop and get the case studies is one building block. Us being able to engage is the second, but the funding is the third. So that is the suggestion for the July meeting. And I think giving it the time to really focus on it and really hear from a lot of different people and to have time to debate, I think is really important, which is why we haven't loaded other items on. Then in September, we're conscious we're leading up to COP26. So again, we think there should be a focus, and maybe that's the session where we do look at our own specific action plan, because it links in with what's happening at a regional level with the regional action plan that's being developed. And it would allow us to look at that then at a local level. So I think maybe the September date would tie in and linking that to COP26 in terms of the discussion that's already been had today. And then also, I think there's been some interest in terms of Parks and Countryside and their role. And I don't know if other people have spotted, I'm seeing so many changes with Parks and Countryside. They've really starting to respond to some of the requests that have come through from the public, the relaxed mowing. So it'd be really good to hear their policies and their future ambition and what's happening. And then I think we've all agreed all the way through that young people and schools are fundamental. We are currently undertaking work in schools through the public sector decarbonisation, so there'll be an opportunity to show what's happened, discuss how we roll that out further across the school estate, which again is another significant sector of carbon contribution in the council, but also again looking at that kind of school engagement and education piece within that session. And then one element, we always focus on scope 1 and 2 emissions, which for anyone who's not familiar with those topics, we talk, about the kind of direct emissions that are coming from burning gas, burning electric, burning petrol, diesel. But scope 3 is those kind of indirect consumption emissions. So it could be flying, it could be what food we're eating, it could be business travel, for example. So Climate Commission has committed to measuring our Scope 3 emissions at a city level. So by that point, we will have that data. The council has committed to measuring our own organisation's Scope 3 emissions. So I think it would be really good to have a debate. We focus very heavily on housing and transport and kind of business and industry. But I think we also need to be starting to have more of a focus on that wider agenda. And then also we've got in obviously the 2 annual plans, one that goes to full council, one that goes to exec board. And there is scope, I think, especially in the March meeting for other items. And obviously this is all open for discussion, but it was a start of a 10 and just some of the logic behind it. Thank you. You're on mute again, Councillor Warshaw.
You know, seriously, what does it mean today? I'm a bit like that Swedish striker who couldn't score from 3 yards when it comes to the mute button today. Right. There is an awful lot of work in that forward plan. I've got a number of people who've indicated they want to speak. So in the order you came up, so Councillor Illingworth and Councillor Buckley. Councillor Illingworth is also on mute. This is getting to be epidemic today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I just apologise for my delay in getting here again, but I was trying very hard from about 9:45, but no success. Anyway, the one thing which hasn't been mentioned yet, I've written to Polly about this, is that we urgently need a zero carbon strategy for wood. At the moment, we're planting loads of trees, which is an excellent move, but we need to give some thought to what happens when they're fully grown and ready for harvesting. And I think that's important now because it affects the species that we plant. So if decisions we make about the future use of wood is something which will affect what we plant for the future as well. One thing which is important this because if we simply chop the trees down and let them rot, they will re-emit all the carbon which they've laboriously fixed. So we'll be completely back to square one again. So it's most important that wood isn't allowed to rot and not allowed to have the fate that it enjoys today. We can use it for buildings, and I've seen scientific articles saying how extensively we could replace steel, structural steel, with wood with modern building techniques, and that'd be an excellent thing because it ties it up for a century or so, and it's not available for rotting. It's not available for catching on fire, we hope. It simply is doing a structural job, providing buildings. And of course, it affects our building program right away, does that? I mean, we should be thinking in terms of designing wooden buildings and wooden accommodation and dealing with all the other things like rotting and fireproofing and so forth. And those are important objectives. We need to have a decision before we can decide what to plant. Now, the other thing is, hang on,
John, just on that, I think it's an excellent point you raised. I think that's one for the biodiversity working group, where parks can forward their woodland management plan. And that's one for biodiversity work. Please continue with your other point.
Okay, very near the end of it now. So we could make from it carbon neutral aviation spirit if we wanted. We may be looking for some remedy like that. So chemically, it's possible to change waste wood into aviation spirit with reasonable efficiency. And refineries are doing it today. And of course, it is carbon neutral. So the flying that we can't eliminate, the flying that has to take place, could at least be flown with carbon neutral spirit to power it. Other avenues, and this applies to waste wood from buildings, if it sat for a century as a building, it's still usable for these things afterwards. We can make biochar and bury it, or we can raise soil organic carbon. But we need to be alive to this. I have put lots and lots of wood chip on my allotment. It's wonderful stuff for growing in, a bit of fertilizer and so forth, and dung mixed in, but it disintegrates the soil quite fast. You know, within a year or so, you can see how much has gone. It's oxidizing, it's being metabolized, loads of bugs are growing on it, excellent, healthy soil, but the wood that you've put into it doesn't last. You need to control that process if you're going to get the long-term carbon benefit from it. And I say that needs research. It needs people studying behavior of large amounts of wood added to soil and trying to not stop degradation completely, but make it a sensible speed in view of the situation we're now in. And there's lots of research activity there. Jobs for the boys. Anyway, nice to talk about. And I apologize again for being late.
No, good points. We'll discuss them at length at the working group, I think, John. I think that's excellent. Okay. I've got Councillor Buckley, then Councillor Carlill.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to Polly, actually, because an awful lot of hard work goes into this, and I think sometimes we don't quite realise that. So we ought to thank Polly. And just very, very briefly, I always like listening to Councillor Illingworth because he knows all these things about various things, which I will never know. But his point about trees is a very interesting one because we should be planting more trees, not fewer trees, but they should be in the right place. And this is a subject which I think we'll probably come back to at some other point. But the question I just wanted to ask here was just a couple of things. Now we've got a West Yorkshire mayor, and of course, it's very easy to forget this. I haven't actually met her yet. I've looked at her on the screen, but I haven't met her. And obviously the mayor has all kinds of powers over transport matters, trains, buses, roads, new roads, and all that kind of thing. What procedures do we think ought to apply in terms of linking in our thinking with what the mayor's planning to do? Surely Leeds is obviously the dominant city in West Yorkshire. I think that's my first question. And secondly, just on this behavioural point, we've got an interesting behavioural consequence at the moment, haven't we? Whereby there are so many second-hand cars being bought that the prices are going up. So there we are, Chair. Thank you.
No, thanks for that. I mean, Polly, do you want to comment about the links with the mayoralty and the works going on there?
Yeah, so we've always worked closely with West Yorkshire partners. So we always meet with all the different groups. Obviously, we have the regional Yorkshire and Humber. There is work, and there was work going on before the mayor came in terms of the roadmap and how that ties in with our own roadmap. The way that the structure's been set up, there's a cabinet set up and there are lead members, and I'm meeting the lead member for climate this week with the Chief Exec of Harrogate to brief them on what's happening at a West Yorkshire level. So I think, you know, those connections are being made, and I think the Yorkshire and Humber, and I'm on the regional low carbon working group as well. So there are lots of opportunities, and we are making sure that we are plugging into all of them and making sure that everything is kind of tied up as best as we can, and that we're not duplicating as well. And that if another local authority is doing something, that we learn from them and vice versa. So I think it will probably start to become clearer in a couple of months, but I think the building blocks are definitely all in place.
Thanks for that. Councillor Carlill.
Thanks, Chair. I always seem to be following Councillor Buckley, but this time I'll completely agree with him on the point, because that'll just make a difference. Absolutely right point about the mayor and where we're going there. In many areas in the council, we've had plans for some time that have been difficult to find funding. If the mayor now has that funding, then there are areas such as our cycle ambition, where we've had an 800-kilometre network. They're ready to go, but that will cost us £800 million or upwards to deliver. I think we're at 172 kilometres of that last time I checked. But if the mayor now has funding, we've got a plan ready to go on something like that. So that's an excellent point you raised, Neil, on that. I had just a couple of points around both the working groups and the forward plan. Completely agree with that view in bringing behaviour change in, because I think on issues such as planning, on issues such as many, so behaviour change is obviously key in the transport world, but people's understanding of the climate emergency and how we have those conversations at a local level and engage with people is something that I think is really key, and something that I know a lot of good work's gone on. I'm going to bring it up probably later on the next report, but I think it would be good for us to look at that and ensure that we are working with people, bringing people along with us, and hopefully people start pushing us to go further than we are, because that's, I know, what we'd like to do. I just wondered further about the working groups. Obviously, the discussion about the action plan is really useful, and I completely agree that it'd be good in the September meeting to bring all of that together across all council departments. I wondered whether all the working groups, whether all council services are in some way tied to a working group, because I understand that we're picking up the top departments, I guess, that can have a part to play in climate change, transport, planning, etc. But there are all the other powers that we have, whether soft or hard powers as a council, that can be really important. And obviously, as this committee, we want to make sure we're maximising it. So I'm thinking like areas like procurement, for instance.
Yeah.
There are a working group that can look into our policies of those to ensure that we're understanding the bigger picture as an advisory committee. And I think we know that all departments have to be doing all they can, and all individuals across the city have to be doing all they can in order to meet the aims we have. And I just think that we're the committee that should really be looking at that. So there's my points about the working groups. One quick one about the funding. I wondered whether we're looking at just funding that's available to the council, or whether we should look wider than that, because the council only has certain abilities to deliver, but funding for individuals to improve their homes, to improve the way they travel, etc., to gather benefits for climate change. I think that would be a useful thing for individuals, community groups, organisations and such, so that we can pass that message on. Thanks, Chair.
I think, George, on that, I think the procurement's an interesting one. I think climate impact is increasingly built into council procurement processes. But let's add that, we can examine that, can't we? I think that's a sensible one to take forward. In terms of funding, it's my understanding, I mean, Polly could probably answer this better, but it's my understanding that it is not just the council those people are looking at. They're looking at projects writ large, and Leeds could be a really good focus for that. Is that correct, Polly?
Yes. So it's kind of more the focus outside of the council, I would say, than within, because I think within the council we have some access to certain funding, but outside we don't. So it's more the focus on that. Although I would say it's probably at the first stage it is more focused on housing retrofit than maybe transport. And I think that is where the market is really focusing at the moment. So I think it's more likely to be housing funding in July.
Thanks for that. And the good news is, colleagues, that I think that recently we were discussing the cost of housing retrofit, and the really excellent news is that the estimate for getting the whole of the Leeds housing stock to net zero has gone down from £6 billion to £5 billion. So that's a big step forward. But in all seriousness, that really sets very starkly out the scale of the challenge we face. That's the housing stock as a whole. And it's important to note one of the really important roles for the mayor, one of the reasons I was particularly pleased that Tracy was elected. Matt, this is not a dig at you, I promise. Right? But the role of the mayor, as an emissary to central government, to say West Yorkshire's doing all this work, the components of West Yorkshire like Leeds understand this and get this. This is what we need, is a really important role, and shouldn't be underestimated. That, if you like, the emissarial soft power role is important beyond just actual funding that Tracy can secure. Good that will be. So, okay, folks. Councillor Anderson.
I'll be quick. Can I suggest, in terms of the funding, we put a call out to entrepreneurs, try and find an appropriate wording to find people who would be willing to put some money into some schemes, so that we can get an idea, not necessarily for the next meeting, but who are the entrepreneurs out there who would be willing to put in some seed capital. I've been involved with an organisation in a previous existence on fuel poverty that at the time I was introduced to, actually Prince Charles, believe it or not, actually chairs. So it's a charity, and so it's things like that. Also, I do think we need to try and get some relationship going with the people who are looking after COP26 as to what their thoughts are, what are their initial working papers. Can we get a hold of them? Where are they going to be getting funding from? You can invite them along by all means, but at least get a position paper from the Chamber of Commerce as to where they're going to secure funding from their members that could be utilised to meet some of our needs. Yes, they'll make a profit from it, but that would be one way. The same with the CBI and the same with the Institute of Directors. Get a position paper from them as to where they're going to lever in funding to this city to try and meet our needs. I would also maybe be an idea to get a representative from Bristol to come and talk to us. Now, I had the pleasure of working alongside one of the Green councillors in Bristol, and they have been very imaginative down there, and they've also got a mayor who it appears to be on form down in that area as well. And it's the biggest city closest in terms of size to Leeds that have had a relative success. So while they're not anywhere near our size, I think we can learn from Bristol. The other thing is, yes, I would agree about the parks role. We've got a lot of confusion out there just now about verge cutting. It's growing, and parks came out with a policy in about February where they were going to have more relaxed mowing. Well, the community, it seems to have slipped past them, because my post bag is full of people saying, why aren't the council doing this? And I'm writing back to them, justifying the council policy as to why we do have a policy in place about verge cutting. And also understanding wildflowering. For example, and it's just by coincidence that Councillor Flint is in the call for the first time today, but I've had my residents cannot understand why there is wildflowers growing outside of the havens. Try and explain to them that's where the trees are planted, and they just do not get it. So we've got a communication point that we need to get across to people, that wildflowering and tree planting is something that are coming together. The other thing as well on behavioural, yes, I would totally support that, because we need to start communicating people. And the final thing is on the West Yorkshire Mayor. I think there's a role for West Yorkshire to pay in terms of getting size. If we can negotiate prices on behalf of the whole of West Yorkshire, I think that's something. And the other thing that goes along with that is the government's problem is that they do give us money, but they give us until yesterday to make our minds up whether we've got it spent. And if we've not got it spent, we lose it. So we've got to make it very clear to government that give us notice instead of this bidding process where, you know, unless you've got something shovel ready or whatever the phrase is, we lose out. And I think we've got to get, there is money there in the government, but they do seem to be their way of allocating it is not something that is very easy to go along with. Thank you.
No, thanks, Councillor Anderson. There's a lot of detail there. I think just, yes, we can reach out to the Chamber and to entrepreneurs at large. There's an awful lot going on at a regional level to COP26. Don't worry, there's not going to be a Leeds delegation flying up there by private plane or anything like that. Don't worry, it's nothing like that. I mean, I want to bring in a few more speakers, and then Polly could answer probably a clutch of points on mass, if that's all right, because I am conscious of time. But they were good points, Barry. So next, I've got Councillor Forsyth.
Right, thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much, Polly, for all of your continued work ongoing. And I'm very pleased that we're talking about starting the action plan in September. I do wonder, though, whether the working groups could at least start the sort of what would be in the action plan, because there could well be things that we need to capture that don't look as though they're necessarily actions for the council that might need to be looked at. I'm thinking about one particular thing in example, I know it's a bit of a hobby horse with me, is we all like to grow, but the whole thing about using peat-based compost, etc., there's a lot of other things going on, sort of, if you like, that we need to be look at. Thank you very much, Councillor Anderson, for pointing out about Bristol's been mentioned a lot this morning, and we don't really need to reinvent the wheel necessarily. I think it's a really good idea to look up the action plans elsewhere to see that we're actually, you know, sort of being holistic about this. Any action plan, there's always a column that says how much, therefore the idea of having the funding information first is a really good one. Are we able to put into that any look at the suggestion from the Leeds Climate Commission previously about carbon bonds? In terms of funding, that was something that has been suggested previously. I completely agree about the idea about behaviour change, looking at behaviour change. And in particular, I'm on Children's and Family Scrutiny, and I'm particularly interested in looking at the work with children and families and with schools as well. And this is an area which I have suggested that our scrutiny board looks at. I don't know how that would work together, but I do think that we need to try to work, as you said, sort of with every part of the departments as well. So thank you very much, Polly, and everybody else. And that's my contribution for the moment.
Thanks, Anne. I think, yeah, in terms of carbon bonds, I think there are sort of green bonds, carbon bonds are a work in progress at the moment, I think, which Polly can speak to in a moment. But I want to get through Councillors Robinson and Councillors Hartbrook before we bring Polly in. Then I've got, after Polly's spot, I've got Councillor Ray and Councillor Flint. So, Matthew.
Thanks, Chair. Peter mentioned this about and we've looked at some of this with the Resources Scrutiny Committee about procurement. Now, while it might not be sexy, it is incredibly effective in delivering climate change. The analogy that was used by Peter was talking about the cycle network, 800 million, what that could deliver. Leeds spends per annum 800 million on its procurement. If we were better at spending through our procurement budget, we would be far better at making a carbon saving, not just here in Leeds, but nationally as well. And linked to that is, and I'm pleased Anne mentioned it, peat-free compost. 80% of what is sold at the area in terms of compost contains 50% peat. We should be moving to say that actually Leeds and through Leeds City Council, we will not sell any compost that contains peat. It's absolutely the right thing to do. It's good for climate change and it's where the market's moving anyway. We should be ahead of the market, not playing catch up with this. You've talked about behaviour change. Through the West Yorkshire mayoral election, and I would have been an equally big advocate, Neil, as for climate change.
I'm sure you would have been.
You can bank on it. Talk about soft power, it would have been actual delivery, you know. But what I think we need to make sure we look at is thinking about behaviour change, and all of the candidates agreed we're pushing against an open door with some of the behaviour change. It is actually people having the ability to take this up. So whether it is solar panels on your roof, if you're owner occupied, where do you go? Who do you get it from? How is it most effective? Is it good value for money? I think we are pushing at an open door with some of this. What I would urge this committee to do and subcommittees to do is actually add something to your considerations, which is the business impact. We talked in our first item about more people working from home. That does have a consequence on business in the city. That does have a consequence on jobs and the jobs we deliver, not just now, but the jobs of the future. And we should really be looking at more of a digital agenda and how we push that and how that impacts climate change and how we work that into everything we do in the city. It's not just good for future jobs and the economy, it's good for climate change too. Thanks, Chair.
You know, I agree very much so. It's, if members can cast their mind back, when colleagues came to speak to us from transport, they're saying if we can capture about 20% of the reduced travel demand in the city on a sustained basis, then that really changes the investment decisions we make as a city council going forward. And I think, Matt, you're right. I think a lot of people are embedding the changes in the last 15 months into their lifestyles. I think we need to support that. And I think if people have noticed the amount of work going on with the city fibre project at the moment, Leeds is in fairly short order going to be a full fibre city. And that really does change how people can work from home. And I do also think, sorry, Matt?
Neil, just to add to your point, because you're talking about people making that change. You know, if people would normally get the bus into work and they're working from home, that does have a consequence on the money that's going to the buses as well.
It does.
And we do need to think about that. It is this holistic economic impact that I'm talking about.
Oh, very much so. And it is that phrase that everything is interconnected and how these things are going to play off each other. We have to be on the front foot with this and try to understand the processes that are going on. So it's a fascinating discussion that's going to keep going and going. Councillor Hartbrook.
Yes, just a few quick points, feeding back on some of the previous comments. Councillor Illingworth mentioned around tree policies. I've done quite a bit of work over the years with Finland, sort of leading their FSC work, moving from PEFC, and there's a lot of stuff that is known, whether it be planting different cultures of split trees instead of monocultures to replace trees that have been harvested. And then in terms of building, yes, wood is a great material because obviously it's much less, it's a carbon sink, whereas concrete is a carbon, a generator of carbon in its kind of manufacture. but there's a lot of stuff around there, kind of around passive house spec, and build how to build more sustainable houses that are fit for the future. So I'm not proposing to kind of go through those now, but there are ideas out there, and I suggest we steal them with pride. Councillor Carlisle mentioned about procurement, and Councillor Robinson mentioned it's not sexy. As somebody who works in procurement, I'm not sure whether I dare agree or not. But we spend 800 million a year, and absolutely we should be leading by example, putting our pound, our council pound into the areas where we can have, so whether that for me coming from a food manufacturing background, things like low carbon meat rather than bringing it in from the cheapest sources in Brazil. And I completely get the funding issues in terms of how that's paid for, but it's particularly pertinent to me when you see the news that's come out of the Australian trade deal recently. And then I think the amount of rigor that goes into so that we don't greenwash. I saw a recent proposal for the council buying new furniture, and in the sort of mandatory green section that went into the proposal, the reason it was suggested it was green was because, well, the furniture's been transported from Bradford, so that's good, isn't it? Well, no, actually, the best thing to do is to, reduce, reuse, and replace, rather than claim that just because you've only shipped it 10 miles across West Yorkshire, that's somehow green. It's not. I think Councillor Anderson kind of mentioned about entrepreneurs, and I think I'm keen that we get the balance right between acting local and acting as individuals and acting as citizens and influencing locally and influencing in our city. But also, I feel as we are the region, like it or lump it, that created the Industrial Revolution, that got us into this place in the first place. And I kind of think we should raise our aspirations to be not just role models in terms of how we all behave and how we behave as a city, but in terms of the industries that we create to take us out of the situation that the planet faces. Because ultimately we can do fantastic things in Leeds, and of course, and I genuinely hope we do. But ultimately, if we don't role model that and encourage other societies and other cultures and other countries to follow us in that, then CO2 doesn't matter whether it's made in China or America or Canada or Leeds. No. It's a global issue. So I think getting that us acting as acting as in a bigger role. And I realise when budgets are tight, that's difficult. Finally, one really quick point, or 2 quick points. Sorry, Councillor Robinson mentioned about the green economy, and I completely get the city centre. What I will say on the flip side is a lot of regional centres have seen a boom in trade, and I think going forward, Leeds city centre is a booming city anyway, and up till now, I would say, had been taking a lot of resource and energy from regional centres. So I personally would like to see a balanced approach to how we obviously create a thriving city centre, but let's not forget the regional centres as well. And Councillor Anderson also mentioned about mowing and safe mowing policy. I would like that also. I've had four residents contact me in the past 48 hours around a section on the A639 that they viewed was unsafe because literally they couldn't see to pull out of the junction. I was actually there this morning trimming it myself because it was the fastest way of getting it done. So I think, I think relaxed mowing, and we all want to see beautiful meadows full of flowers. I would say that kind of letting just grass to grow to kind of 50 shades of grass is not necessarily the same as creating a meadow. So I think just getting that balance right, and that's me done.
Points. No. Thanks for that, Conrad. Points well made. Polly, I've got Councillor Ray, Councillor Flint, and Councillor Hayden. So I'll bring you in now, and then we have our next 3 speakers, and then we can wrap the item up. So Polly.
Right, I'll do it really quickly, so apologies if I miss anything. So in terms of COP26, we are making links at a regional level with Mayor Jarvis and what's happening with Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission. So we're trying to do that regionally. We've put applications in for events at COP26. We're also making links with various businesses in terms of what they're looking to do and seeing how we can tie up. And I think next week I'm speaking with the lead on COP26 about actually how do we get the most out of COP26 by working across organisations within the city. So that's a national discussion with government. So obviously we'll feed back as things start to come from that. In the lead up to COP26, we are looking to do a focus in the city on green jobs and skills, doing a lot about how we help young people into those jobs and skills. I won't steal Chad's thunder because he might be going to talk about it, but just to sort of set that context, because that's been raised a lot and it's really high up my sort of agenda in terms of what we need to be doing. I think Councillor Forsyth's idea about the action plans within the working group is good and can certainly help to contribute. So we were already looking to do that with food, but I certainly think that's something we can look at across the other working groups as well in terms of how that develops. Climate bond is something we were due to launch last September and ironically ended up getting cancelled because we got grant funding. So it meant that we could do all the works we were going to do at zero cost, and so we are now looking at alternatives, but it was kind of postponed, I suppose I should say, rather than cancelled. So we're now looking at how we can bring that back to the table, because I think it's really a really important piece in terms of the engagement part, even more so than for the funding point. So that is still definitely something that's high up my own agenda. In terms of Peat, I can say, which will hopefully will be received positively, we have already taken that decision to stop. You will still see it, unfortunately, because there is a stock that's going to work through, and obviously actually it causes more damage if it's been taken. We may as well finish using it, but no more will be bought. So Chief Officer in Parks and Countryside has confirmed that decision has already been taken. Yeah, I think that was probably the fundamental point. Maybe put in the chat if anyone thinks I've missed anything they really wanted an answer to.
No, thanks, Polly. That's great. Right, Councillors Ray, then Councillor Flynn, then Councillor Hayden.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for some of those answers, Polly. Just a couple of points, and I know the enthusiasm for members here to always talk about schools and children, but I think we need to remember who's actually buying the stuff for the kids, and it's their parents. And I don't want to lose sight of the comms message we actually have to have to adults, because the next generation, to a greater or lesser extent, is already bought into this. There's a lot going on in schools already, and I know we need to reinforce that, but we desperately need not to lose the conversation with adults, because they're the ones buying the stuff for kids. So can we please not lose that and just focus on children alone? Because actually, if you've got ingrained behaviours, they're the hardest to change, rather than creating new behaviours, which is relatively easier to do with young people. Taking up the point about the relaxed mowing in the meadows, there is a real big comms problem with this, and I think I've raised this several times before. We do need to have a strategy in parks and country and highways, because again, it's multiple different landowners within the council need to have a comms strategy around, we're planning to do this to your local hedges, and then stick a sign there. I know it's laborious, but actually advertising the council is doing something purposefully stops those complaints coming in, us then getting lots of complaints, the grass then getting cut, and then we go back to exactly the same position. We need to have a proper forward thinking. We need to sit highways, parks and country, and the council's other contractors who cut this grass together in one room with a plan that actually, it might mean we roll it out slower across the city, but we do it in a sustainable, logical way, so that actually residents don't get onto us and then we don't get onto officers. Other than that, I think the other bits have been mentioned by other people.
Third time this meeting, gee whiz, really should be on top of a meeting. No, I think, Paul, if you can bring that point about ingrained behaviour to the slightly evolved working group, I think that'd be a good place to start with that. And you're right, I think it is getting those adults to change as well at the same time. Councillor Flint.
Sorry, once again, apologies about my dogs in the background. They're running around the garden. Sorry about that.
It's usually mine, so to be fair, it's not a problem. We're a dog and cat friendly panel. Councillor Flint.
That's good to know. Yeah, thank you. I'm learning a lot from you all. It's really fascinating. I guess I just wanted to raise a couple of things. I think the behaviour change thing is really, really important. But I think in all the conversations we're having, I think we need to have the conversation about kind of reducing poverty and inequality at the same time. I think living in poverty is a real barrier to the kind of having choice in how people behave. And I think from my work background and my kind of campaigning background, a lot of climate change stuff is very, very middle class. And in order to take kind of everyone with us in the city on the journey, reducing carbon. We need to really be working on reducing social and economic inequality. I think, you know, I've learned that from all the conversations I've been having on the doorstep as well, that, you know, a lot of people don't have choice when they're in survival mode. And then as a parent of 3 teenagers and a youth worker, I agree with what Councillor Ray was saying as parent, but also I'm just interested to know in your work as an advisory board, you know, how much you hear from young people and like what the link is there, because, you know, young people have the best ideas, I think, on all this, and just how much are we hearing from them and getting input from them. Thank you.
No, thank you. They're really good points. I mean, yeah, we've in the forward plan, there's another session with young people engagement. We've had them in previous years, and they've been really helpful. It's basically young people's takeover of the committee, and we've learned a lot. As you said, young people have a lot of the best ideas, and they very much understand the issues around climate emergency and what's going on. And they're certainly perhaps the biggest stake in all of this. Certainly, that's a learning experience. As things get back to a post-COVID period, we'll be able to get back to talking more with young people, particularly, but not only just the youth strike movement. They informed us about a lot of issues. It was a really interesting process. But the strong theme here throughout this, all colleagues, it's about communication and education, isn't it? This has run through all our conversations today, which is why the next item is quite a lot about that. But last up on this item is Councillor Hayden.
Thank you. I clearly can't unmute either. Yeah, thank you for that. Just a couple of points. It was mentioned about just different types of grasses and not wildflowers, although wildflowers look very nice. Biodiversity means that we need lots of different, and maybe not what looks pretty, but what is actually good for wildlife and pollinators, and not for the way it looks. I take your point about it feeling dangerous and I've found myself kind of raising myself up if I am ever driving, because it is really important that we don't that we have a relaxed mowing policy. But definitely take the points that Councillor Anderson made, and we've spoken about this with myself and Councillor Walshaw as well, about getting that strategic overlook. And it was mentioned getting everybody in the same room. I think that would be a really good idea, because there seems to be a lot of confusion over the relaxed mowing, and that is something definitely that I've raised a couple of weeks ago, and we need to have a coherent plan going forward, our policy going forward. Councillor Robinson's point about the city centre, I love the city centre. You know, I love everything about it. I always have done. Having said that, the point about regional centres, and I actually would say local centres, and what we've seen in the pandemic is our local centres that have been in decline many of them being in decline. People using them a lot more because they are working from home. And this idea of 15-minute neighbourhoods, we can't do that if we're concentrating solely on the economic fortunes of the city centre, which I take the point very, very seriously. Having said that, if we could have that balanced approach where local centres, such that I can walk to within 10 minutes and do my shopping locally, it will not only mean that there's reduced carbon emissions, but that the local businesses are thriving, and that people can make that, they don't have to use the car because or public transport or anything else, because they can walk there, they can cycle there. And it just means that our local neighbourhoods, which are so important to all of us as individual ward elected members, you know, thrive, because more and more people are at home and not heading in for the city and then out again. So I'll just make that point. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you. As development plan party, I'm a bit out for 15 to 20-minute neighbourhoods. I think they're really important, and you can see that change on the ground. Before we move to the next item, just very briefly, in my own garden village of Headingley, we've had a pub with an actual pub licence and planning permission in Headingley go from being a pub to be managed office space. Now, everyone knows the economy of Headingley, that's quite a change and quite a welcome one, I think. And people are wanting to work locally. I think that's really positive. Right, folks, there's a lot we've taken notes throughout all of this about items for the forward plan. We'll sort of collate these and then circulate around thoughts to people about what's to go in what working groups, and then people can reply to myself and Harriet about how to move forward with that, if that's okay. On that note, I am conscious of time. I want to get on to the next item. We are going to overrun, I think, but that's okay. So this is citywide engagement. So I'm going to hand over to the team without any further ado. Chad, I think you're leading off. Chad, have I woken you up? Excellent, thank you.
Chad, if you're speaking, no one can hear.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, there's two different mute buttons, I've just found out, so apologies. For those who are new to the committee or who are watching at home, I'm the lead for communications for the Sustainable Energy and Air Quality team. And I've been asked to make a presentation about, providing an update on what is happening in the city on communications and engagement. Members will know that this is a really, really important area, and it's frequently been said in this meeting. It is very broad in scope, and we are very lucky in Leeds to have many different organisations from the public, private and third sectors all working together to engage with the public on the climate emergency. So as part of this presentation, I will hand off at several times to Kate and Simon from the Climate Commission, to Jenny from Climate Action Leeds, and Adrian from the Connecting Leeds team in Leeds City Council will also talk about the latest engagement campaigns on kind of transport behaviour change. In the interest of time, can I ask members to please save any questions until the end of the presentation, and then we can take those all together. I'm also really conscious of time, so we will try and be as quickly as possible, but we may have to overrun the meeting. So just to start, why is communication and engagement important? Ever since Leeds declared a climate emergency, we have said that ambitious climate action is dependent on engagement at every level. So we need engagement from individuals, from businesses, from local, regional and national government, if we are to see the ambitious changes that are required to hit the 2030 target. Separately and more recently, Leeds Climate Commission has done work, looking at housing and transport in particular, which has identified that more engagement is needed to increase the city's readiness for housing, retrofit, and also the sustainable travel measures that we need. 2 years ago, we did a big Leeds climate conversation with around 8,000 people, and we did find widespread support for ambitious climate action in the city, but many also said that they didn't know where to start in their own lives and that they wanted to see leadership from governments and businesses. So clearly communication has an essential role at addressing those 2 points. I think it's fair to say that in Leeds, over the last few years, we are increasingly seeing a spotlight on the city and on climate action that is taking place in the city. So my team regularly sends out a newsletter every month with the latest updates and opportunities to more than 5,500 residents. We also regularly see more than more than 30,000 impressions every month in terms of the people who are engaging on social media, and that's just our account. That doesn't include the reach of any posts put out through the corporate channels as well. And we are also increasingly seeing media interest in the work that Leeds is doing. So just since the start of January, there's been more than 200 climate related news stories focused on climate action and climate related issues in Leeds. I've included some logos of some of the publications from a local, national and also trade press that have reported on the work that Leeds is doing. And just this morning, in fact, Councillor Hayden was speaking on the Today programme on Radio 4. We know that there is a growing and engaged population in Leeds who are engaged with these issues, and we know that there is increasingly a spotlight on the work that is happening in Leeds. However, there are still many people who have not yet been engaged, and so the focus of our work and the focus of this presentation really this year will be on kind of reaching new audiences and in order to accelerate positive action, because we know that there are many who are very passionate about this issue, but similarly there are also many who we still need to persuade if we are to achieve the ambitious changes that we need to see. So we will do this kind of in these four main ways. So hyperlocal and peer-to-peer engagement, working with stakeholders and the media, delivering council campaigns and developing the channels that we own and we control, and improving our own internal communications. In terms of that first bullet point, when I say peer-to-peer communications, we know from experience working on solar schemes and on EV trials, as I will go on to explain, that many people will be persuaded to make changes if they know someone themselves personally who have made the changes and can vouch for them. So for solar, for instance, we know that if a neighbour gets solar panels, then the people around it, around that person, who that person talks to, are more likely to make the transition themselves. Members will probably be familiar with the EV trial scheme, and this is just one example of a really great bit of peer-to-peer communications, in that Mr. Alan Hart, who has participated in the scheme, was so pleased with his electric van that he recorded a video and put it on his own YouTube channel, and it's been seen by kind of 4,500 people who have a particular interest in his usual plumbing videos, and it's a really great example of how the work that we are doing and the work that we're doing to kind of support and encourage our own kind of participants, our own customers, will help change the narrative a little bit. And finally, just before I move on to some of the other speakers, I just wanted to make a quick point, which was actually mentioned earlier on in the meeting, in terms of what is the role of communications. The UK Civil Service has a nice kind of definition, which I thought was worth mentioning, in that communications they see as one of the four core policy levers of governments of various levels. Obviously, there are constraints on local and regional governments in that which national governments don't necessarily have, but there are also opportunities, I should say. So in and of itself, communication and engagement is vital, can have an impact, and we certainly need more of it, and we will continue to do so. But I do think it's worth making the point that it is most effective when working in tandem with the other policy levers. So when all of the policy levers are being pulled in the same direction, that is when communication and engagement will be the most effective. So engagement can provide motivation and information, but it cannot always provide the capability or opportunity for the behaviour change if, for example, there are financial or infrastructure barriers. So the first major update I wanted to just make members aware of, and members are possibly already aware of this, but we've been working over the last year with, in discussions with BBC Radio 5 Live, who have chosen Leeds as a city to shine a spotlight on the work that is being done and the challenges that we face in order to achieve our 2030 net zero target. So they launched this series on the 24th of May, and every month they will aim to have a news programme based in Leeds. There is a slight delay due to some of the sporting fixtures at the moment, but from that point onwards, it will be kind of every month. And that will reach, an estimated 5.4 million weekly listeners. And they've seen some great engagement so far. So the video on the right was one of our residents who used to be a miner and was now talking about why he's giving up his coal fireplace. And that was actually one of the BBC website's most watched videos on the 24th of May. So it is seeing a lot of interest. So I'm now going to hand over to Kate Locke from the Leeds Climate Commission, who can talk about about the Leeds Act Together campaign, which is a really great example of work across the city to bring stakeholders together and inspire others. So over to you, Kate.
Thanks very much, Chad. So yes, I'm the Policy and Communications Manager for the Place-Based Climate Action Network, or PCAN as it's known, and I'm based at the University of Leeds, and I work with Professor Andy Gouldson, who is chair of the Leeds Climate Commission. Just a very brief bit of context, PCAN's a 5-year project that's funded by the Economic and Social Research Council. And it's about translating climate policy into action on the ground in our communities and connecting global climate policy, the Paris Agreement, to the local scale and our own place-based net zero targets, which we've done through our own Leeds net zero carbon roadmap that Paul Chatterton mentioned and demonstrated earlier in his video. PCAN consists of place-based partnerships that bring together organisations from the public, private and third sectors in the form of climate commissions. And these are independent advisory bodies, and Leeds Climate Commission, which was formed in 2017, was the very first of these. And indeed, the model we established here in Leeds was the inspiration for the many other climate commissions that have now taken off around the UK. So just that's a little bit of context about PCAN, about Leeds Climate Commission and what I do. And I'm here today to tell you about Leeds Acts Together, which is a communications campaign that the Commission is running and which I'm leading on, and I'm being supported by my colleague Simon Moore, who is here in the background and will chip in, I'm sure, if I need any support. So a little bit of background. In 2019, the Leeds Climate Commission ran the Leeds Climate Change Citizens Jury, and the question we asked them was, what should Leeds do about the emergency of climate change? And they produced a raft of recommendations. And one of those key recommendations that was very high up in the order was the call for a citywide communications drive. And they call for clear, positive and practical messages which emphasise the necessity for individuals, community and organisational level at all levels. So that's something that's, we've been tasked with, the city's been tasked with by the Leeds Climate Change Citizens Jury. Next slide, please. I won't touch on this because Chad's already covered it and we're a bit short for time. That's just a bit of context. Thank you. So in 2020, Leeds Climate Commission conducted a series of participatory workshops with stakeholders across the city for a climate action readiness assessment. And we looked at the main sectors, which you can see there: transport, public buildings, commercial buildings and housing, which make up around 85% of Leeds's direct emissions. And there were lots of findings about, where are the opportunities and where are the barriers. But really one of the key things that came out was a cross-cutting call for a campaign to communicate the benefits of what they've phrased as like whole community regeneration through taking climate action. And that really comes back to, really emphasising the opportunities for Leeds and for communities across Leeds to benefit from climate action. I think that comes back to the point that Councillor Flint was making about social and economic inequality as well. So that was a key finding there. So next slide, please. And obviously Chad's mentioned that we have a spotlight on us now with Leeds City on a Mission. The Climate Commission's been part of those sort of negotiations, talking to the BBC as well. And that's really given us the impetus for this Leeds Acts Together campaign, because the spotlight is on Leeds, once a month. And I don't know whether any of you have listened to the programming already, but people's voices coming through, the discussions they've been having have been absolutely fantastic. And it's a real opportunity for us to kind of piggyback on this campaign and to do a separate parallel campaign, which is what we're doing, and really try and capture those audiences and talk to them, and audiences that we admit, we sometimes struggle to communicate with. So that's what we want to do with Leeds Acts Together. Next slide, please, Chad. So that's it. That's what it looks like. And we've got a small collective that's come together. And that's a social media graphic that's been produced by one of the members of the group, Will Saunders, which we're very thankful. So look out for that. It will change as we go along. Next slide, thanks. So a little bit about the campaign. As I said, we've brought together professionals in communications and public engagement across Leeds. So I think there's about 15 in the group now. And we're using this opportunity from the BBC's campaign to run this Leeds Acts Together campaign, in response to the calls that I've mentioned from the Citizens Jury and from the findings of the Climate Action Readiness Assessment. And I ask, who is the audience for this? At the moment, we're concentrating on organisations and businesses. And you saw from the findings from the Big Leeds Climate Conversation that the public is really looking for organisations and businesses, not just to reduce their own emissions, but to help them. and also, to lead by example. And so that is the ask. That is our ask. We're asking businesses and organisations to take part, to inspire, encourage, and demonstrate leadership, and to promote engagement in order to help everybody in Leeds play their part. So it kicked off in May when the first broadcast, the first Radio 5 live broadcast happened on the 24th of May. And 11 organisations have taken part so far, and the hashtag Leeds Acts Together was used 27 times. We have a page on the website where you can sign up for updates. And when I last checked, we had 23 organisations, businesses and groups signed up. I would hope and think there might be more by then. I need to check. The core group is planning monthly campaigns, which are aligned to Five Lives themes. And they are flexible enough to allow organisations to participate with messages appropriate for them, but at the same time, each month there will be a theme. And as it says there, the next theme in July is going to be food, which is a great theme to really engage people with. The target, so I've got some targets in my head. We had 11 organisations take part last time. I would hope to up that to 22 this time, especially with more anchor institutions, SMEs. Chad mentioned communicating with hyper-local groups as well. All that's important. And as you can see, we've got some ambitious targets for kind of the midpoint in November and the end point next year to engage a lot more organisations and businesses. So how you can take part. First of all, there's the link at the top. There's a page on our website for Leeds Acts Together campaign. So have a look at that and sign up to that if you're an organisation or business or councillors. If you can promote that link to organisations and businesses and share that campaign with your networks, that would be so helpful for us, because really this is a citywide campaign, and this is how it will spread. Contact your community, your organisation's communications and marketing team, and confirm that they plan to participate. They will have comm schedules, so they'll be planning those. So get in on the act early and get them to make sure that it's in their plans. Talk to colleagues about what your organisation can contribute. What is it doing about its own net zero journey, and how can it help people in Leeds with theirs? So although this is a social media campaign, this is the start. And as Chad said, we need to connect the talking with the action. So the fact that we are going to be talking about it on social media, we hope that it will trigger these conversations and actions in organisations and businesses. To do that, we need you to take part in the campaign when it's running and to post using the hashtag Leeds Acts Together. And we don't mind which form of social media you use. So if you want to make TikTok videos, we'd love it. But at the moment, it's mainly Twitter. But whatever your social media is, please get engaged. Just use the hashtag, then we can track it. And obviously, we realise not everybody's on social media, and that's a crucial point. This is our starting point because as a group, as an organisation, Leeds Climate Commission doesn't have any resources. So that we're doing this kind of, at a very basic level at the moment, but we want to be stepping that up if the resource comes, that we can take this away from social media and do a lot more on the ground. That's an opportunity we will seize, and it's an opportunity that other people can do. So there is an opportunity there to take action, which is obviously what this is all about. And finally, support. As I said, we're a small group with no resources, and all of you, we need you, your skills, your ideas, resources, help, all of that would be greatly received. And I just had a thought about, if you're encouraging behaviour change in your transport working group, maybe there's an area there that we can start to, you could feed into our campaign, because that would be really helpful potentially. So just some thoughts on that. Next slide, please. Future plans. We will be evaluating the campaign, setting up some KPIs, and we have a master's student who's going to be, for her dissertation, evaluating the campaign and looking how it's working, so we can adjust as we go along and hopefully increase the impact. As I've said, we're looking on the potential to make this into a bigger campaign. That will depend on response and resources. This is the first strand, if you like, in what we're talking to in terms of climate communications. So the next thing we'd like to do at the end of this year is start developing a citywide climate communication strategy. And one of the tools we've talked about using that is the Britain Talks Climate Toolkit from Climate Outreach, and they are climate communication specialists. and this toolkit is a really valuable way to target and talk to disengaged segments of. It's a values-based toolkit of the population. So again, it's another opportunity to talk about behaviour change. And going back to Councillor Ray's comments about engaging with adults, this is very much, at this level. And long term, we're looking to co-create a positive narrative for Leeds, ensuring that all voices are heard and can contribute to a new story about what Leeds could be like 2030 and beyond. And that story needs to respect the well-being of others so that all can thrive, and it needs to make sure that we are protecting ecosystems locally and worldwide. So that's going to be something very exciting, and we'll be looking to start on that again, maybe midpoint of next year. I think that's it. There's one more slide with my contact details. So there again is the link for the Leeds Acts Together page on the website. If you want to get in touch with the Climate Commission or with me personally, there are the details. And if you're not already following Leeds Climate Commission on Twitter, there's our handle. So please follow us and join in and tweet. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kate. So I'm going to move swiftly on now from the work of the Climate Commission to another project which supports that work and the work of the Council as well, particularly on the ground. So over to you, Jenny, from Climate Action Leeds.
Hi everyone, and thanks for having me here. I'm the Communication and Engagement Lead at Climate Action Leeds. I've got quite a lot to get through, so I'll rattle through it quickly as possible because I know we're short for time. So I think that quite a lot of you are familiar with our project already. We are formally called the Climate Emergency Community Action Programme, and we've renamed to something that's slightly more easy to identify with. So we are now Climate Action Leeds. It's a 5-year programme. We're successful with getting an award from the National Lottery Climate Action Fund for £2.5 million. This was born out of the coming together of over 40 organisations in Leeds, which recognise that the urgent climate challenge can only really be met through collaboration and a whole systems approach that mobilises the entire city. So we have 5 delivery partners: Voluntary Action Leeds, Leeds Love It, Share It, Together for Peace, Leeds Tidal and CAG Consultants. And the idea and structure for Climate Action Leeds emerged from the activities of our future Leeds, who you heard from earlier. And they act as an independent strategic partner, offering guidance, support and lobbying and advocacy work for this programme. Next slide, please. So Climate Action Leeds has a transformative, ambitious vision for our city. Leeds has got to become a zero carbon, nature friendly, socially just and livable city by the 2030s. So we're building on lots of good work that's been mentioned already, but for Climate Action Leeds, how we do this work is inseparable from what we want to achieve. So we use a movement building ethos based on informing, empowering, connecting and mobilising communities to plan and act strategically across the city. Next slide, please. And so therefore our work is underpinned by a core set of values around enabling and hearing different voices and recognising and addressing inequalities, be it of access, information, status, power or experience. Our community-centred work recognises that those who are most affected by issues will also be best placed to find the solutions. So climate change impacts the most vulnerable members of society most, and the response has to be embedded in social justice, both locally and internationally. So the slide just lays out a few of the elements that we're utilising to try to make sure that this happens in a meaningful and not tokenistic way. Next slide, please. So the bedrock of Climate Action Leeds is the local community hubs, which will be based in 8 communities across Leeds to facilitate community-led climate action within neighbourhoods. Development work in 4 of these started last October and will start in 4 new areas in the early autumn. These hubs are being selected carefully to reflect the diversity of different communities in Leeds, and in each area we're supporting residents to develop a local climate action group that we support and work with to create their own community climate action plan based on local priorities. When they're ready, our budget allows for financial support for the activities agreed in these plans and the employment of a local hub worker for 3 years to support the group hub and activities. Because of COVID restrictions, obviously the engagement work has largely been online, which hasn't been as difficult as we feared, but it has slowed things down slightly. So we've been approaching local stakeholders in the first instance, while equally ensuring that residents are at the centre and the process is resident-led. So all the areas now have residents involved who are either on or expressing interest in being on a steering group to become a climate action group, and are working or about to start on final development phases of the hubs becoming operational. In addition, our programme of support and grants for 8 other smaller projects will start in October this year, and these will be available to communities, groups and projects citywide. Next slide, please. So as well as hubs based in the community settings, our programme of work involves setting up a core hub in Leeds city centre as a place for the whole project to come together. It's going to take different forms at different times. We aim to hold workshops, skill sharing events, drop-in sessions and exhibitions to find different, creative, playful, fun and sometimes challenging ways to bring new and diverse people into this conversation. Our ultimate aim is to see a permanent venue where the public can come and learn more about Leeds and the challenges it faces, and play an active part in envisaging their city and shaping its future. It will become a central planning and action room for how we tackle the climate emergency and build a community-based and just transition. Sadly, though, our original space is no longer an option, so we're currently exploring other options with partners like the BID team and the Climate Emergency Centres Network. If anybody has any ideas, do please reach out to us. Next slide, please. So the Climate Assembly is a roundtable event that takes place twice a year and plays a critical role in the structure of our programme. It's an open cross-sector event where Climate Action Leeds engages with the broader community of Leeds with the aim to share, learn and plan together. So this could see faith groups, business leaders, school children and activists all taking their place in a shared conversation, finding connections and creating plans for all their mutual benefit. And it's an event to celebrate progress too, but also to focus on how we tackle the real challenges ahead together. So we'd love people to get involved with that. Next slide, please. So as well as communities of place, there's an important role for communities of interest or experts. And these are represented within our programme by our 7 transition partners appointed for the thematic areas of food, housing, nature, energy, youth and education, work and economy and transport. We're also talking and learning with the Racial Justice Network about how to ensure that climate justice is inextricably part of what we do. So these transition partners are just getting set up, but we believe that they could link very fruitfully with the CEAC groups that have been mentioned earlier. And they're going to be hosting regular assemblies in their particular fields and work towards developing sector plans on their theme. Next slide, please. So all the different elements of this programme will feed into an overarching city plan, which is going to provide a framework for how we see the direction of Leeds over the next few years. We're using the approach of award-winning economist Kate Rayworth and Donut Economics. So as the slide says, Donut Economics is a compass for human prosperity in the 21st century with the aim of meeting the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. This approach asks, how can people in a particular place thrive without exceeding and damaging planetary boundaries, say of carbon, water, soil, and so on, and without falling below aspects that ensure a good life like education, health, democracy, equality. Next slide, please. So we call this the Leeds Donut, where we aim to live in a safe and thriving space inside those boundaries. We're really excited about this collaboration with Kate Rayworth and her team. It's an approach that has gained global recognition and support, with cities and regions adopting it and high-profile advocates for it. So it's an incredibly exciting opportunity for Leeds to be at the cutting edge of economic, environmental and social thinking. It's got really powerful potential as a tool for communicating and enabling us to envisage the city anew. So really it's a call out to get you all involved. We're really at the early stages of this, but it links into what you're talking about, developing a cohesive, strategic city plan based on our climate aspirations. So it's going to draw in researchers, business leaders, officials and the public in what we hope is going to be an inspiring, open and collaborative planning process. The final element of how we engage, next slide please, is that our internal processes are important. So we want to embed a test and learn ethos, an evaluation of learning, and support training across the city. I think we can skip on to the next slide. Finally, so obviously we're going to be busy over the next 5 years. We're putting all of the above into practice, and due to its complexity, much of the early phases of this project has been getting staff and structures in place and integrating aims and approaches, but we're excited to be moving into a more outward focused phase. So we've got a launch to come in a few months' time, a website, a social media plan, and targeted engagement support on the way. So watch this space. There's lots of opportunity to engage with what we're doing, and particularly we want to connect in the work on the donut in our first climate assembly in September or October, and the training programme, which should be kicking off with a series of events in the autumn. Final slide, please. So that's about it. Just to say, none of this can be done alone, and we reach out to anyone and everyone who wants to play a part in what we're doing. I don't think there's going to be time for me to take questions, but you can get in touch at my email address here. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. So as you can see, there is a lot of excellent work taking place to communicate climate change in Leeds, and we're working as hard as possible to keep everything as joined up as possible between organisations. Finally, I'm going to ask Adrian from the Connecting Leeds team here at Leeds City Council to talk more about the Walk It, Ride It campaign and some of the other kind of communications work that's taking place. Members will be aware, emissions from transport are one of the main contributors to the city's carbon footprint, in particular from road transport. So, and I know it is something that has been flagged in previous meetings. So I wanted to use this as an opportunity to highlight this brand new campaign, which fits neatly into the work of the transport strategy and the work of getting people to leave the car at home. Over to you, Adrian.
Thank you, Chad, and good afternoon, councillors. I've got a large number of slides, but I'll probably cut them short because I obviously appreciate we've been for time. So I'll probably go to about slide 13. Chad, just to let you know, I'm getting all these updates about lunch and so forth.
Stop. Sorry.
Yeah, okay. So if you go to the second slide, I've got a bit too far.
I thought it said slide 13. Apologies.
So go to slide 2. So yeah, the vision we're working towards is to be a city where you don't need a car, which has been put forward in the forthcoming transport strategy and draft strategy. So we want Leeds to be a city where walking and cycling and green public transport become the most appealing, practical and best value choices for many more journeys, and where streets obviously are attractive play spaces for everyone to join. What that means for the campaign, on the next slide please, Chad, is that this is, as I think has been indicated by a lot of other speakers already, that this is the start of a bigger journey to achieve this vision. We want to encourage people to step back and think about walking and cycling as part of their everyday travel mix. And our campaign is looking to inspire, motivate, and to make it easy for people to bring fun, easy movement into their everyday. Next slide. Just a bit of background, this campaign is funded by essentially the LIPTIP programme, Leeds Investment Public Transport Programme. And over the course of the last lockdown period, we've undertaken quite a significant amount of research with, particularly with qualitatively members of the public who are keeping travel diaries. But what we're looking at is those in lockdown, those that have either considered or made recent start into more walking and cycling. And they're the core audience that we're looking to target for this campaign. We've established what easy wins are and the trips that people are most likely to see changing, which is what the focus of the campaign's around. We've worked in terms of focus groups to get the creative approach and the approach that's going to make most impact. And we've tested this out with a variety of the public and stakeholders and councillors to develop the final piece of the campaign. So this campaign was launched around 2 weeks ago and we'll run it over the summer. If you want to go to the next slide, please, Chad. So that's just giving a visual representation of what the kind of campaign's about, a very street style theme with the footprints and the paths and the treads. It's all about trying to create that street feel with the Walk It, Ride It logo. The Walk It, Ride It is due, we've picked Ride It because it encompasses riding a bike, riding a bus, riding a scooter, and it's not then just encompassing about all the active travel modes as part of this campaign. And the next slide. So this is the start of a collective citywide movement towards healthier, greener travel in Leeds, and it's to encourage is to encourage people to consider walking and cycling and all other green travel modes. So when we talk about other green travel modes, we want to pick up that we can ride the bus and promote the bus as part of this campaign when social distancing lets us towards the end of the summer. So the first phase of this campaign aims to nudge people to consider walking or cycling for the short journeys, such as the school run, the local shop or park and adventure to and from work. And what we know is that a high proportion, around 60% of journeys are made of less than 3 miles in the car. And those are the types of journeys that we're looking to switch in terms of making at least one trip a week a change for people in their behaviour. Next slide is a video of the campaign.
Would you like me to play it, Adrian?
Yes, please. Thank you. Just to point out that the campaign is not anti-car. So this is about priming or people to choose the most appropriate journey that's appropriate for them. Obviously, we know that in people's busy lives and hectic lives, as given examples already in the meeting, that sometimes you don't necessarily have much choice about where you need to be and how you need to get there. But this campaign is just trying to prime and nudge people to actually think about that. Sometimes when you do have a choice, perhaps you can consider the other options for the shorter journeys. Next slide, please, Chad. So these are examples of some of the kind of creative approaches we've got here. This is just trying to show how we can locally target across the Leeds and across districts of Leeds about how we can encourage people and message people around making one small change to a weekly journey: walk, cycle, run, or use a bus, and leave your car at home. And we've adapted this style for lots of other sort of examples, including social media. So the next slide. And we've agreed a range of case studies for Chapeltown, Moortown and Chapel Allerton, where we've got very focused community engagement and targeted campaign, and where the focus of a lot of our materials and promotion is taking place throughout the summer. And we've been out and captured some real life people and photographed them and got their videos and their case studies, because basically people identify role models as social norms, as people they can identify with to maybe think about and change their behavior. This is some examples of the types of things that we're going to. Next slide. And then we've got a range of social media graphics that are playing on some of the benefits. We found that in our research that health was a bigger motivator for behavior change than maybe the environment or, let's say, climate, but we know that equally some of these motivations will play out in different ways for different people. So we're very much into looking at the benefits about linking the journeys and the trips into, you know, everyday activity. And it's not necessarily about the commute to work, which is obviously something which is obviously prevented them for the pandemic, but it's something we'll come back to once restrictions lift, about those more work journeys into the city as well. So next slide, please, Chad. And again, playing on the benefits of the sort of modes of travel, particularly cycling. It's the quickest mode of transport for those that choose to use it, and also free parking. There's lots of places to park, vis-a-vis thinking about if you're parking or paying to park a car, for instance. Next slide. And again, it's just trying to make use of the weather and the timeliness of the messaging. Thinking obviously the last few weeks the sun's been out, lots more people out on leisure trips and bikes and so forth and walking. And obviously thinking about leave the car if it's not that far. These kind of things are trying to prime and nudge people to think about their particular journeys, or if you've got something from the shop, maybe you can think about those journeys as well. If we just end it there, Chad, I'd just like to say that there's a range of photography and case studies, and we've got a website which is walkitrideit.com, which features all this material, and which we're directing people to the website for information, for the case studies, and for links to help with the cycling and the information about walking and benefits. And also we'll add information about the bus part of the campaign when it's ready to go live. Just also the campaign is it's a kind of cross citywide campaign. It's trying not to be the council or the combined authority trying to tell people what to do. It's trying to be neutral in that we recognise that people have got their own choices and difficulties and issues, and we want people to just nudge and prime them into the sort of direction we're going into. We'll have obviously a proper evaluation and feedback about how the impacts of this campaign works later in the summer, which I'm sure will feed back to perhaps the group that's been referred to in the committee going forward, the transport group, for more specifics. But essentially, obviously happy to take questions. We'll obviously feed the campaign more widely. If you want further information or if you want the presentation, we're happy to share that.
Thanks, Adrian. I'm going to pass back to you, Chair, and to see what you want to do with questions.
Oh, brilliant! Thanks. Yeah, stop screen sharing. I mean, that was an awful lot of information for members to digest. And a little bit running over, that's totally down to me. And introduced an additional item on how we're going to look at the committee going forward. That's entirely my fault. So we actually will finish in reality more or less on time. But I think there was a lot to process there. I think there's really good work going on in terms of comms and engagement. I've got a number of councillors who've been waiting patiently to speak. So I've got Councillor Buckley, then Councillor Ray.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not going to spend long. I mean, there was an awful lot of stuff there, and I could ask lots and lots of questions, but I'll just limit them to one or two if I can, as briefly as I can. The BBC Radio 5 item was interesting because it's the first I've heard of it. And my briefing note says that the council have engaged in a year of discussions with Radio 5. It would have been nice to know that was happening. But specifically on mass communications, which 5,000 residents received the newsletter and how are they selected? And is there not a danger with these things of a self-selecting audience, an echo chamber? So the only people who receive information about climate change are the people who are already committed to trying to prevent it. And the other 80% of people in the city who either are neutral on it or think it's a good thing, but somebody else will do it, or don't give a damn, they're never contacted. And a classic example, I have to say, is that in my ward of All Woodley, the parish council transformed a bland, pretty dreary piece of grassland into a vibrant community asset called the Village Green. The Village Green had relaxed mowing the other day. Nobody knew anything about it. The relaxed mowing was completely in the wrong place and nobody had been told about it. So parish councils are the absolute bedrock of locality. They know what's going on. They've actually been voted for. So I would just say, please communicate with the parishes. And just one final thing, very, very briefly, Chair. Chapeltown was mentioned in the video, and then we had Seacroft, Garforth, Otley and Beeston. What do they all have in common? I'll leave that question hanging in the air. Thank you.
Well, I dread to think what they all have in common, to be honest.
I'll give you the answer. You've obviously given it, so I'll give you the answer. None of them have any Conservative councillors in them.
Well, I couldn't possibly speak to how that's come about. But hey ho. I mean, I genuinely can't.
Would you like me to come back on the point about the newsletter and 5 Live, Chair?
Please, yeah, that's quite specific, and then it's Councillor Gray.
Yep. Okay. So you're absolutely right in that the newsletter and the social media are self-selecting samples. The original membership for the newsletter came from the work that we did when we did the Big Leeds Climate Conversation, and it's grown organically since then. So you're absolutely right in that, the type of people that would sign up to these things are those that have an interest in climate change. But that, I think, underscores a point in the presentation about what we're trying to do to reach new audiences and working with stakeholders whether that is other organisations, whether that is stakeholders internally, whether it's localities teams, for example, is something that we're trying to do. The peer-to-peer examples as well, it is something that we're actively trying to do, because it is the age-old question in terms of communications and on this issue. So we are actively working to reach new people. In terms of 5 Live, I should say the year of discussions were very on and off as a result of coronavirus. So it wasn't a year of consistent communications. We have shared an update to all members via the regular emails that get sent from Councillor Lewis about COVID and other things. But apologies if you didn't receive that or weren't made aware of that. There will be lots more opportunities for member engagement with that programme over the next year.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chad. Councillor Ray.
Councillor Ray, you're muted.
I mean, I can't speak today. I've got this wrong so many times. Councillor Paul, you're still muted, mate. Still muted. I'll come back to you in a minute once you've had a. Councillor Forsyth.
Right, thank you very much. I won't say very much. Obviously, there's lots I could say. What I want to say particularly is a big well done to our future Leeds for getting the 2.5 million funding and now setting up the climate action Leeds. That's great. As far as I know, my understanding is that the areas that they chose were basically because there was already some work going on, so they're building on that. But what I really want to say is, for those colleagues who are concerned about the economy, can I really recommend you have a look at Kate Rayworth's Donut Economics? I'm really pleased that was flagged up at the end. I suggest that it's a must read for people. Thanks very much.
I have, and it is. Yeah, I would really recommend that as well. It's really, really important work, as is the spirit level, which kind of predates it from a slightly different angle. Anyway, Councillor Ray, are you all sorted out now? Nope. Can't I? Yeah. I'm so sorry about this. Right. Councillor Illingworth, then Councillor Robinson.
I hope I managed to unmute this time, Chair.
You have.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it's the title of this section is on citywide engagement, and I wanted to draw attention to an area where it's very worrying. It seems that citywide engagement hasn't taken place, or even local engagement. Is it not the case that Leeds FAS 2 has not yet had a proper climate change review? Silence that. Sorry, I'll say it again. Is it the case, or not the case, that Leeds FAS 2 has not yet had a proper climate change review? Because as far as I can discover, and I've been checking carefully over the last few days, most of the documents date from 2017, before the climate initiative had started. And a major £120 million scheme, which is going to transform the environment in my area, in Kirkstall and Armley, appears not to have been taken on board. If I'm wrong about this, I apologise for wasting your time, but as far as I can see, that's the case. And in particular, biodiversity hasn't been properly considered as part of FAS 2, the flood alleviation scheme. I'm really upset about that. It's all very well as lecturing people in the Amazon about not cutting down their rainforests, but they can reasonably respond and say, well, what do you do about biodiversity where you live? To which the answer appears to be not very much. So I'm concerned about the fact it hasn't been reviewed. I'm concerned it has a considerable environmental impact, and that the public consultation has been woefully inadequate. I'm now going to my ward and getting feedback from my electors saying, what about this? What about this? We weren't told about this. What's your explanation for it? It's an embarrassing position to be in. Mm-hmm. But I'm still discovering alarming things that are wrong with FAS 2. I say lack of regard for biodiversity has got to be top of the list, I think. But the inadequacy of the proposals, water storage of Calverley, 1/3 of what's actually required. We need a threefold expansion in the amount of storage for the storage scheme to work. Where is that water going to be stored? It isn't in the plans. Results, yeah? I'm serious. I'm serious, Chair,
really
and I
important.
want a little bit more to say, but I'd like to say it in this forum so that people who are sensitive to these things are aware of what we're doing and what can be done possibly to stop it. It results in having to have much larger flood defences than we otherwise would need. And looking at the figures in detail, you know, I do a lot of forensic stuff on this sort of thing. Some of them are physically unreasonable, unbelievable. The arithmetic needs checking. Water doesn't flow uphill. So I just flag up my alarm at discovering literally in this week massive aspects of the proposals that have never been consulted on, that we weren't expecting, which are far more damaging than I expected, and to shout with alarm, oi, oi, what's going wrong here? Because something is not right about this, and I think it deserves a much closer look.
Well, I was going to suggest, John, that we could either raise it in any other business or...
well, it's a failure of consultation, Chair. That's the reason why I picked this particular item. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
No, the point I would point out that FAS has like around 2 million trees in upper catchment areas, but I appreciate there's been some local issues in Armley and in Kirkstall about.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah,
but I found more of them. There isn't time to speak at this at length, but happily speak to a more detailed discussion of this.
Well, we could have a further discussion outside this forum, mate, and that'd be, happy to do that as CX Chair.
I'd be grateful.
Yeah,
Chair.
No worries, that's fine. Paul, come on, third time lucky. Councillor Ray, come on. Damn it! I can't hear you.
Is it plugged in?
No, hang on. No, we can't hear you, Paul. And we did try 3 times. I'm sorry, Paul. Councillor Robinson.
Thanks, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. And I'm sure we'll all be revisiting the first thing we discussed about working from home as well, in light of able to access this. It was a question for Kate in her presentation, but Jenny and Adrian may want to come in as well. I think Kate mentioned about 11 businesses that were involved in her element. I just wondered what those businesses were, which sectors they were working in, and if Jenny and Adrian had got similar feedback that they could give us as well.
Oh, good question.
Good question, and you've completely put me on the spot.
Sorry.
Yeah. I'd have to dig around and call up the list. There were some big organisations, like obviously the university and the city council, key, and all of the people who were involved in the campaign from our climate collective. But also we got some that I didn't expect, like a company in Leeds that makes flags, and a local community action group. Those are just 2 that jump out at me, but I'm sorry that I don't have the list in front of me at the moment. But obviously we were priming some, encouraging the people involved in our group to get involved. But definitely some hopped in that we hadn't expected, or it straight reached out to, which was great. But that was just the starting point. So there's a lot more work to do, and obviously this is all very resource and time heavy. We're doing our best.
If folks want to feedback to us as a committee by email, that's by all means that'd be acceptable as well. I appreciate sometimes our questions can put contributors on the spot, but if feedback by email to the group as a whole, or via Harriet as our clerk, that'd be absolutely fine.
Chair, I think it would be really useful if they could. I appreciate it. It wasn't to put you on the spot, okay? It was just to try and find out, I suppose, 2 elements to this comment. Just to try and find out if it's the same old usual suspects. So it reflects on Councillor Buckley's point. We need to be reaching more businesses and actually engaging with more of them, getting at beyond the usual echo chamber. But secondly, if we're doing work with 5 Live, I'm sure there's a really interesting piece to be done about businesses that are seeking to become carbon neutral. They're seeking to engage with climate change. It's great publicity for their businesses, obviously, being a part of this, but it's actually great for other businesses to know what they're doing and find out what best practice is, and maybe troubleshoot a little bit how we tackle climate change going forward. So that was the comment I wanted to make. Thanks, Chair.
No, thank you. I mean, it's reaching out to businesses is really important, but like you said, it's communicating to businesses that this can look at, these are what your colleagues are doing, these are what your competitors are doing. Even you can save money doing this. I think, Kate, did you want to just come back on that?
yeah, just to say, yeah, we completely agree. You know, we're starting from nothing. So we start with the friendly contacts that we know, and as I said, some jumped in that we weren't anticipating, which is great. But the whole idea of piggybacking on the 5 Live campaign, and well, the 5 Live coverage, they have very clearly say we're not doing a campaign, so we have to keep some clear water between what we're doing, which is a social media campaign, but at the same time use the spotlight that they're providing. So I think, you know, next time we're going to be tweeting a lot more kind of directly sort of jumping onto some of those tweets as we can start to engage those audiences, because there were some really great organizations that were taking part in the 5 Live coverage. Those are that we absolutely agree, you know, those are the voices we need to reach. So yeah, this is just the start, but we've got ambitious targets, and you know, we're hoping to really build on those.
Excellent. I think that, yeah, I mean, just to wrap things up, unless Councillor Ray's finally solved his muting problems. No, alas. Okay, I'm not seeing any more hands. I think just going to Climate Action Leeds, obviously got the funding up and running. It's fantastic. I think as a committee and as individual elected members, we'd all very much like to be involved. So please keep us all informed. That would be fantastic. Particularly looking forward to the first Climate Assembly. Keen to be involved in that. So there's an awful lot going on. Is there anything we need to cover on this item, folks? Otherwise, we can wrap things up for the session. No? Awesome. We have run slightly over. Entirely blame the chair. That was my fault for bringing an item of discussion, further item of discussion. Covered a lot of ground today. Thank you very much. Harriet, when's the... Oh, Councillor Conrad?
Yeah, sorry, just building on something, because Paul, although he's being muted, has typed something, and I just wanted to kind of read it out because I've got a comment to make on it, if I'm allowed. It is basically, he does have some concerns over the middle classness of some of the social media content. This is where are the Hunslets, Beestons, Richmond Hills, etc. I'd add to that and say, actually, I agree, because although I live in leafy Rothwell these days, I'm a Seacroft lad by heart. And actually, it's the very communities that are sometimes the hardest to reach and don't have the SUVs that are the ones that do most of the cycling already. So anything we can do to help people in Seacroft and Hunslet and Beeston, etc., cycle, as well as Rothwell and Woodlesford, where I live, and Adel, etc., is important. So I think that, keeping that balanced. That's it. I'm out.
No, thank you very much. It's point well made. I mean, getting the communications right and reaching those areas is central to what we're doing over the next couple of years, isn't it? A lot to be done, folks. Harriet, when's the date and time of our next meeting?
The next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, the 28th of July at 10 a.m. And based on the conversations earlier in the meeting, I presume that we're going ahead with a remote consultative meeting again. This
we
meeting,
are.
is that right, Chair?
Yeah, okay. that was a strong steer from the committee, and
thank you.
I am a collegiate and benign chair, so let's do that. No, I've enjoyed today. We've covered a lot of ground. Thanks so much, folks. I think we're finished. Stay safe. Have a safe journey to your kitchens. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.